minutes in.
This meeting is being recorded.
Aggressive.
Everyone's clear on that.
As the lady said. But yeah, welcome to the Saturn and Pisces talk, everybody. I'm recording this for posterity. A lot of people asked me to do that. This is supposed to be kind of an informal talk. It's the first time I've really hosted anything like this. I just love talking astrology, and any excuse I could get to do that, I will do that. So I'm figuring it out along the way, and any input or like, I really want this to be free flowing and like going back and forth as much as we like. But yeah, I would love if everyone just kind of introduced themselves, like name, pronouns, and then your experience with astrology. That'd be great.
I am Cheyenne, she, her, and my background in astrology, I'm a self-taught interest person. I basically binged a whole series of podcasts and like took notes and
I love that.
taught myself at least how to read my own chart. And I do a lot of reading for like my family and friends. So I feel like I have a pretty good grasp and understanding. And my Saturn in Pisces is happening in March.
Woo! Are you what degree? Wait, you were born in 1993 or 94?
94.
Okay, so you're like back when Saturn was making that
retrograde, yeah.
Oh, I should probably introduce myself too. I'm Allie, she, her, and I've been studying astrology informally for the last 5-ish years, and then I took a certification course about 2 years ago, and then I've been studying ever since like a mad woman, and I'm planning on doing another certification course this year in June around my solar return, which is exciting.
Mm-hmm.
But
I'm just gonna apologize in advance. My kids are also in the background somewhere, so I might have to like jump in and out. So
do whatever you need to do.
Same. My babies, if you hear babies crying, that could be on my end too. Yeah. I have 2 littles. Okay, so I'm Christy, she, her. I knew nothing of astrology until 6 months ago when like I like chance linked up with Deborah Silverman. And
a lot of people like Deborah here. I noticed cool. There's lots of Deborah people here.
Yeah, so I just graduated from her course. I did levels 1, 2, and 3, like rapid fire in succession. It was just like once you learn it, you become so obsessed. I was obsessed. Yes. I was like dreaming astrology. So I just graduated and I've been doing like readings like every day to try to really like acclimate myself and kind of get used to it because I'm just obsessed.
I love that, Christy. I would love to hear more about Deborah's approach and like her like basically what she's transmitting, like what's her tradition look like and stuff like that. Right. I took the Nightlight Astrology course run by Adam Ellenboss.
I've seen that podcast.
I love him. He's like my first like big astrology love. And like really someone when they spoke, I felt like I understand. And I feel like it spoke to my soul in a different way than a lot of astrologers do. But anyway, who would like to go next?
I can go. I am Ashley, she, her. I have always loved astrology, but I feel like I just keep myself at like this level. I haven't like really done a deep dive or anything. So I want to start getting into it, but I have a quick question. So when you were talking about like where your Saturn was when you were born, and this may be a silly question, but again, I'm pretty new to this. So I have the little CoStar app, right? That tells you like where. So so if my Saturn is in like Scorpio in the 11th house, that's like where it was when you were born, right? And so that's just, but that always changes or?
So there's the Saturn or the natal chart is both a still image and in movement, because what you're seeing is just a snapshot of the sky. And there are ways to look at your chart where it does change, like progressions. So you would look at the chart the day after you were born to symbolize the first year of your life, like when you turn 1, and then the day after for 2, 3, and so on. But the natal chart is just kind of like the groundwork that you're working from. And so that never changes.
Cool.
The only thing that, the house placements might change depending on the house system you're using. From my knowledge, CoStar defaults to Porphyry, which is a quadrant house system. I use whole sign houses. They have different options, but most people are probably familiar with their Placidus house placements. But the sign, the sign, we can go all over that if you have questions, but the sign itself, like Saturn in Scorpio, that doesn't change.
Cool.
So.
Okay.
Would anyone else like to introduce themselves or
I'll go.
Yes, go for it.
My name is Jessie. Pronouns are she, her. I started studying astrology literally a year ago. This marks my first year, and what got me into it was just really curiosity. I didn't really know much about it, and once I started, I was hooked, and I have been on this skyrocketing journey since then. And I did the courses with Deborah Silverman as well. And I'm
Love
still
that. My Deborah Silverman sister.
yeah.
I love
So
those.
that was really exciting to go through and finish all 3 courses on Zoom because I was just so sucked into it. But
I
I'm
love those.
still so in awe and like awestruck still that I'm like waiting for everything to like sink in still.
Mhm.
It's a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
That's like what I've learned is that like there are books that are like this I would consider a pretty introductory book, The Inner Sky by Stephen Forrest. And I still go look at like his significant, like how he defines the planets and the houses and the zodiac, and I'm still just like, oh, there's so much here. And I think that as long as you like foster that curiosity, that you can go back to the basics over and over, and there's so much more to mine, like
Mhm.
forever and ever.
Yeah.
But so I think if anyone else would like to introduce themselves, feel free. If you're here just to observe or ask questions, that's fine too. No pressure. But let's get into, if there's no one else who would like to. Okay. So I have a basic outline for the talk right now. I actually would like to show my screen just really quick. I probably won't do it the whole time, but let's do it like this. But these are like my notes. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, I use Notion, and so I kind of like created this giant board of like all of my crazy notes. So what I did
Amazing.
was I was like,
Amazing.
Saturn requires this amount of dedication and responsibility because if I don't, he will. So we could start, I think, I want this to be fluid because I think when you talk astrology, all the pieces are like moving gears together. So to talk about one spoke, you kind of have to talk about the other. You know what I mean? But so overall, I want to talk about the significations of Saturn and go over the Saturn cycle and kind of like talk to you guys and like what your experience is or what you've learned about that, and then go over the meaning and symbolism of Pisces and kind of give some of the basics on like the qualities and things like that. And then I did some research on Saturn and Pisces throughout history with the last 100 years. So I went and I looked, other people have done this for me, luckily. So I was able to just look at some people who've already like gathered all of the information. And so I took all of that and then highlighted anything that I felt like I kept seeing patterns repeating throughout history. Obviously, some of the history of Saturn in general, Saturn's a really difficult planet, is quite difficult. And so there's some really, I guess this is to give a trigger warning when I go over the history part, because there's some really difficult topics that come up with Saturn, specifically mass murder and genocide. That's something that comes up more than once with Saturn. So I just want to put that out there before we go over the history, and I'll give another warning before we talk about that history. And then at the end, I wanted us, if we, with the time we had left, to go and look at some of our charts and like do some talk about like what is going on, like what does your Saturn story look like, especially if you have Saturn in Pisces, because you're going to be the one feeling specifically the Saturn return. but also just to see where Saturn and Pisces might be hitting in our charts so that we can be aware of like where Saturn is going to bring his significations. But just to go over some of the brief stuff of Saturn, this is my basic Saturn research. So I went over like some significations and like delineations I found in a number of my books. But like the major themes that with Saturn is like restriction, austerity, structure, and boundaries. And these are more of like, I would say the positive things that I see with Saturn. But like if you read some of the old Valens texts and like some of the ancients talk about Saturn, it's almost never nice. But like I think it's nice to update him and give him kind of like, oh, let's see what actually good things Saturn can bring you. Um, he's associated with discipline, punishment, responsibility. A taskmaster is often what I hear him referred to as misery, depression, isolation, and being outcast. Facades and deceit is something that comes up a lot in the old texts, but also just like knowing, like playing a part and putting on a face is often something that comes up with Saturn. Death and decay. So Saturn used to be was the farthest away is the farthest away visible planet, and so before Pluto took on a lot of the significations around death and destruction, Saturn was really like the premium planet for death. But the death that Saturn brings is very different than the way Pluto approaches death, which seems to be more like a transformational thing. And I put tradition, so things that stand the test of time, either I would say that Saturn specifically, being associated with the god Kronos in the Greek tradition, uh, is literally the test of time. Does your thing last, or does it decay over time? Is it derelict because it's not being taken care of? There's no discipline put into it, or is it built with a sturdy enough foundation that time that the test of time does not like it doesn't fail that test of time is I guess the thing, and also like a sullen and dark countenance. Um, and they also talk about him being dirty, which is weird. Um, but I think the particularly interesting part for Saturn that I found in the old Valens texts that I was reading is that he's related to seafarers, and I think that's particularly important for Saturn and Pisces. Seafarers, waterside trades, and death by water. And so that was something that came up in the significations outside of Saturn being placed in Pisces, but I find that when you put Saturn in a water sign, that water becomes the element in which Saturn operates in. But I would love to hear anything that you guys either have questions about or like if that brought up anything for you. I would love to hear that.
I just wanted to throw out there, I'm still really new, right? Like I
Yeah.
rapid fire took Deborah's 3 courses, and was just like sponged as much as I could. But she has like a really interesting like take on it where, because I've read, in some of the books that, all of this stuff about Saturn, it's a lot, it's really tough. And she has this interesting take that like Saturn is all about karmic responsibility. So like
Yeah.
it's like your life lesson marker, which I find so interesting. So her take on it is wherever you see Saturn, it's like opportunity for growth, or like your karmic responsibility to face this mission, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Actually, that really aligns with a lot of how I spoke about the Saturn return cycle as like Saturn's karma for you. And like Saturn is really, I find that Saturn is really about like those, were you able to maintain a disciplined approach consistently over time? And then that's the karma you reap. And whatever it is that you do consistently over time is kind of what ends up being brought by Saturn. I mean, also there's like because I work with a Hellenistic tradition and I use ancient like whole sign houses, and um my approach to astrology is based on predictive, like kind of like the karma specifically, just like what is happening in the circumstances of your life, where I kind of have a philosophy that I use to read that as opposed to like I'm just doing the prediction. And so like I'm taking that like taking that perspective of like, or that knowledge of like what is to come, and then I'm kind of filtering it and going, okay, what is the challenge to learn? And so I think a lot of modern astrologers do that, and I think Deborah in particular is kind of having that perspective where it's like, these are your challenges and it's about spiritual growth. It's not just about, your life sucking.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But Saturn also, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I've heard that interpretation as well, Christy, that it's like your responsibility in terms of the collective kind of idea.
Mhm.
I think that when we get into Pisces a little bit, that collective responsibility is something I find that was, I think, particularly prominent in Saturn and Pisces, because Pisces is that collective energy, that like emotional water, the empathetic, the we're all one kind of feeling. And when you have
Dissolves the
Saturn,
boundaries of the individual.
yeah, but also just like, what is my responsibility to that collective? How can I be how can I be like a contributing member of that? Like, how do I foster the goodwill of man and all of that? But maybe we could go over some of the Saturn qualities. So these are some like different, I guess, like, I don't know, stats on Saturn, but like he's thought of being as excessively dry and cold, um because of him being the furthest from the sun, the slowest moving, so he would be farthest away from the light of the sun and the heat. Um, and I don't know if Deborah, I don't know what tradition is Deborah, what house system does Deborah use? If
I'm not even sure. Jess, do you know?
I think it's the Placidus one.
she uses Placidus, okay.
Yeah.
Does she also use modern rulership, as in like Aquarius would be, or Neptune would be the ruler of Pisces, and
Mhm.
Uranus is the ruler of, okay.
Yeah.
So that might be a little, we're gonna have some like language differences here. Hold on, my phone is going off. I can hear it. Hold on. Why are you going off? What is going on? Okay. That'll probably go off 2 more times before we're done. Okay, so we'll have some language differences there because the way I use outer planets is a little different as well. So in modern rulership, the outer planets are assigned rulership of, specifically in our case, Pisces is ruled by Neptune, and Aquarius is ruled by Uranus. But in the old tradition, before they knew about the outer planets, Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius, and Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces. So I would love to get input from like the modern perspective of that. It's not that I don't use outer planets, I do. I just use them differently. And I would say that Neptune doesn't have rulership over Pisces in, like, from my tradition. It has an affinity with Pisces.
Mm.
And so a lot of what Pisces is in alignment with what Neptune is. But it's, they have more of like, the outer planets have more of like a different quality to me, but that's beside the point. But just to go over the qualities that I have from my traditional, and then I would love to hear more about like um other perspectives on that. But what I have written here is that Saturn is the malefic of the day sect. I don't believe Deborah would be using sect.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so to describe what day sect means is that in the ancient tradition, planets were basically divided into teams of day and night, and Mercury being like the ambiguous planet that could be either, depending on what part of the evening or morning star phase that he was in. But to be of the day sect, what that means is that if you're born during the day, the sun above the ecliptic, then Saturn would be warm. They always thought that Saturn was warmed by the sun, and that his significations would be more positive. So people who are born during the day tend to have an easier time. Oh, there's some people in the waiting room. Let me do that really quick.
Oh no.
They've been waiting. I'm glad that this is recorded. But that during the day, if you were born during the day, that Saturn would be an easier planet for you to handle.
That's
And
so
so
interesting.
as someone with a night chart, I have experienced Saturn, like the energy of Saturn in my 12th house, as being rather difficult and hard to get a hold of. And so the night he's thought to be more difficult at night because of the cooling of the moon and the lack of light to warm him. And so that excessive dry and coldness becomes even harsher. In the ancient tradition, Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius and Capricorn. So that's going to come up later when we talk about the signification of Saturn just moving into Pisces and how we've been going through this Saturn ruled chunk of time. So because Capricorn and Aquarius are right next to each other in the chart and he's in the sign for 2 years, it's just a really like Saturn heavy time because he's in his own rulership. And so having him move out of his own rulership and into Pisces is just like a real tonal shift for us. He is exalted in Libra and depressed in Aries, which does Deborah use exaltations and depressions?
She teaches exaltations, but she doesn't go into great detail.
Okay. I mean, exaltations is really like the best way I love to describe this is that like it's when you you are the guest of honor at a 5-star hotel. So when Saturn moves into Libra, which is interesting because you wouldn't think that like a Venus ruled sign would exalt Saturn of all things. It's like Saturn goes to a 5-star hotel and is exalted in the sign of Libra, which I think we might get into later, but that's just kind of like a little tidbit to kind of keep in the back of your brain. And then is depressed in Aries. So after Saturn moves through Pisces, we'll get him in Aries, and that might be interesting for Saturn ruled things. He rejoices in the 12th house, so yay me. But does she talk about the rejoicing system as well, or no? Okay. So rejoicing really just means that the topics of that house are in alignment with the significations of the planet. So because Saturn is about loss, restriction, depression, isolation, and being outcast, the 12th house topics are very similar. Lack of agency, self-sabotage, unseen enemies, wandering, all kind of go in alignment. So Saturn is able to use the topics of the 12th house to great effect. And then he was the slowest moving planet before the discovery of the outer planets. He's considered a superior planet because he's on the other side of Earth in orbit. So he moves in the elliptical as opposed to when you look at like Venus or Mercury in the sky, they kind of do this back and forth thing around the sun in their retrograde cycle, and they have the morning evening star thing going on. That's a little bit more of like a tidbit. And then I've heard him called a social planet. Does Deborah use that terminology? Interesting. Okay, so social planet I use to mean like a planet that goes out and does things, like it meets the world. So our Venus, which can have like meeting the world in a way, but is often like rulers over our inner desire and is more about attracting things to us. And Mercury is kind of our mind and like how our thinking is. Whereas Mars is like the action outward oriented energy, and then Jupiter is also meeting the world out there, and Saturn is considered a social planet in the same way. And then associated with the god Kronos, which like makes perfect sense to me. But is there anything that I said that anyone would like to elaborate on or like have some input about or like different perspective? I would love to hear. All right, let's move along.
Okay, so just to clarify, so social planet, the way you've learned it is that it kind of affects people outside the orb outside of you. It's not just a personal relationship.
It's like, yeah, well, I would say that it tends to be more about like meeting. So this is not something that I've learned within my tradition. It's something I've heard of and not something that I've used very often. But when I think of it, especially in alignment with the superior planet thing, it's that it's more about like going out into the world. Okay. Right? So like if you have your Mercury and your Venus, which are operating on a mental level and on like a desire level, that has more to do with something that's interior to you. Not that Venus doesn't like have social aspects or doesn't like you obviously use Mercury to speak, but it's something about a transmission from within. And then when you have Mars, this is like, okay, if Venus is the desire, Venus tells Mars what to do. So that's like,
I love
so
that.
this is my desire, Mars. Now you have to go take action to go get it. And then Jupiter often is like that expansive, big social, tends to be associated with like judges and like rulership, like kingly states and things like that. And so there's this sense of like law and order that kind of comes from Jupiter. And then Saturn, I've heard of Saturn often as like social, like the facade, like the roles that we have to play and the restrictions within like enacting our social like space. So like, you know, when you like Saturn is in play when you go to a store and you're talking to the clerk and you know the social script and they say, "Hi, how are you doing?" You say, "I'm fine, how are you?" And you know that you don't actually, or you're not, you might not actually be fine. You probably aren't, like you're moving through the action and like you're putting on the show of like the social thing. And so that's often how I see Saturn. So Saturn rules, has like has significations in the facade of like social interactions that we have sometimes and things like that. But yeah, that's, I've heard social planet, and so I wanted to bring it up because I wondered if anyone else had more experience on that, because that's not something that I use in my practice. I would say superior planet, though that's not superior as in better, but superior as in like motion. But I think if we're good, I think now we can talk about, unless there's any other questions or like topics that brought up for people. All right. So let's get into the Saturn return cycle. So I think I'm going to open this up to you guys and just kind of, I would love to know more about like what your experience is or like knowledge of the Saturn return cycle, because this is something kind of like I put together based on my understanding of Saturn, a little bit of research, and like using the lunar cycle as a framework.
I'm eating right now, so my camera's off. So I'll turn it on when I'm done eating. But I personally have not gone through my Saturn return yet. My Saturn's in Aries, so I'm supposed to go through it after this next cycle in Pisces. But I've been really intrigued by it because I feel like I have a lot of people in my life who have gone through that lately, and I've been doing a lot of research for them.
I love
And
this.
I just put in the chat the 27 Club. I have a lot of theories on that, and it's
yes. Are we talking about a lot of like famous people who have, yes, this, I would say the 27 Club is totally related. So I would love to do more research on that. I think that's a really exciting like area of like it's a very exciting topic to do some interesting research on. I actually have some historical figures to bring up that have some very difficult Saturn return stories. So I think this might have some alignment as well. Is Kurt Cobain part of the 27 Club? Yeah.
Yeah.
Kurt Cobain is a major one of those like charts, like Saturn return charts that like when I looked at it, I was just like, wow. But I think we'll get into that later. That's definitely going to come up with historical figures and like cultural events and stuff. But
okay, I just wrote that down because I've never heard of it, and now I'm super interested. So I just like I have a Google list for after this.
I have a list of like people too. So I've written down a list of like a number of Saturn and return or Saturn and Pisces people. Like historical people that I thought were like, one, well known enough that we could have like kind of a basic discussion about them, and then two, like had a very interesting Saturn and Pisces story. But so I guess I'll like reframe this question about the Saturn return cycle. Like, what is your knowledge and like experience with the lunar cycle? Like, I guess like if we're like just like from new moon to full moon back to new moon. I would like I think one of the things that makes like some of the bigger like planetary cycles seem like kind of unfamiliar is that we don't understand that the framework for every planetary cycle is based on the lunar cycle. And so I think a lot of us have, you know, observed new moons and observed full moons. Oh, Kaden, if you're ready to talk, you can just feel free to unmute. I see a
okay.
little raised hand. Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was interrupting.
No, go for it. Go for it.
I have definitely like a special interest in the lunar cycles as a like practicing psychic medium with an interest in astrology. I feel like it's something I've incorporated a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it really interesting to look at like the significance of what each moon phase means in terms of like the trajectory from new moon, where you can kind of set off on a new journey of setting intentions and going into a new adventure per se. And then I see it as a time to like, you have a lot of, when you put out a goal for something, you have blocks or fears or something in the way of achieving them. And so during the period, I forget the specific names of each lunar cycle or like moon phase within it, but from the period of new moon to full moon,
that would be the first quarter square.
Oh, okay. Thanks. I can't remember all the specifics, so I appreciate that.
No problem.
I see that as a time of like all those fears are coming up as a way of kind of the universe being like, oh, you said you wanted this. Here's what's in the way of it. What are you going to do about that? Up until it gets it to the culminating point of the full moon, where it's kind of on like full blast, like the fears and emotions are really coming out. And then kind of like going up a mountain almost, and with the full moon at the top. And then after the full moon, in theory, if you've gone through and kind of resolved the fears and things that arise during that, the first part where it's going from new moon to full moon, then after the full moon to
the last quarter square or third quarter square.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Then in theory, that's where you see the things that you wanted to bring in start like tangibly manifesting up until you reach the new cycle. So I don't know. I don't know if I correctly understood your question, but I wanted to share that in case it's related.
It is. No, I just wanted to touch base and see like what people's experience with the lunar phases were and what their knowledge of was that. Really just kind of get a beat on like, okay, so we're talking about the Saturn return cycle or the Saturn cycle in general, but every planetary cycle can be understood through the lens of the lunar cycle. So if you understand the lunar cycle, you already have a framework, like a really solid framework for working with any other planetary cycle. And so that's why I brought it up, was just, but I think it's very related, especially with I think what you're really hitting on is that like the quarter squares where the sun and the moon are in a square relationship, which tends to be a tension and a difficulty, those tend to be like the challenging points. And so and then with my understanding of the fruition point is that the culmination of whatever your intention and the actions you took towards that intention come to be happen at the full moon. And then the closing square is, okay, now you have this thing, right? Like if let's say I'm like writing a paper and I have a month to do it, I start at the new moon of the paper, and that's more of the idea phase. It's not really manifest at all. It's really that like unseen seed in the dirt. There's darkness around it, but there's like this thought or idea and intention, and so it starts to like kind of like grow under the dirt. And then there are 4 other lunar phases of the crescent and the gibbous, which they can add some flavor, but I feel like if you understand the full opening square or like first quarter square, the new first quarter square, full last quarter square, and then back to new, you have a better framework. Those are like the anchor points of the lunar cycle. But once that there's enough light that's gained, then you start to see the plant, that seed from the dirt, kind of like start to show up in the light, and like start to have its separation from its point of origin. The opposition or the full moon would be that like flowering point where the plant has reached its fullest and most like separate from the ground. So it may be rooted in the dirt and that's its seed point, but when you get to the fruition point, it's the farthest away and reaching up the highest from that point. And so this is kind of like it being shown in the light and having a manifestation. And then the third quarter square, or the third quarter square, or last quarter square, that's when the plant starts to wither and it's going to seed. So it's getting ready to basically disseminate itself back into the ground so that the material that was taken from the first lunar cycle becomes the material, like goes through this fruition process and then becomes disseminated back into the earth to become basically fertilization or like the new seed for the next lunar cycle. And so you can think of all planetary cycles like that. And I kind of use that framework to flesh out a Saturn cycle. So I basically take the moon and the significations of like, the moon, and I replace them with Saturn in particular. And so this is kind of like my basic outline for it. But first we start off with like our natal Saturn placement, which would be I'll even just give it the theme over time. So like often the Saturn return itself is thought of as like a solidification of adulthood and a revealing of like long-term consequences or actions over time. And so when you go to the Saturn natal placement, we look at natal placements in at least I do this way, as like a natal promise. And so Saturn has a signification in your chart, has a placement in a sign, and the promise Saturn brings is that he will be bringing his significations to that part of your life, in whatever topic or house that he's in. And so I think of this as the seeding point in the life, and that this is the root of where like Saturn's karma is going to blossom. So let's say you have a Saturn, just like an example, like a Saturn in the 7th house, regardless of like Saturn and Pisces, but you have a Saturn in the 7th house, there's going to be challenges, restrictions, fears, anxieties around relationship or intimacy, being able to partner. You may attract people in your life who are very Saturn-like. And so you have to confront Saturn in the topic of relationships. And so anywhere Saturn is in the chart, he's going to bring basically his challenge and his lesson to teach you in that part of your chart. And then anything that is aspecting, he may create difficulties based on his relationship to other planets in your chart and his rulership. So if he's, let's say, in the sign of Pisces, but he would be ruling your, he's ruling your Aquarius or Capricorn placements, at least in the traditional framework, then those topics of him in Pisces are also going to be seen in some way in the Aquarius and Capricorn parts of a chart by virtue of rulership. But this is kind of like, so I went over kind of the basic first Saturn cycle that we'd experience, because I think it really, like, especially from like birth to like age 30-ish, that's really, I think, a really great way, because I think all of us are kind of at least to the closing square of our Saturn return, and so we kind of have experience or have like a knowledge of this, like an embodied way. And so if we have the natal placement, and then about ages 6 to 8, Saturn in the sky, transiting Saturn, is going to be in a difficult square relationship with your natal Saturn. And so this is going to be like the initial challenge to the seed planted at birth. And I kind of like identify it as growing pains of a maturation process. And so this is like when you're 6 to 8 years old. This is when you're starting to develop a sense of independence, and it's the end of your early childhood and you have growing responsibilities. And you might mourn having complete dependence because now you're starting elementary school. You're going to school, you're being separated from your parents, and now, you have to do things for yourself a little more. There's like a distinct difference of like, you might have been in kindergarten or like, preschool, but first grade is really when I think the first Saturn opening square starts. And my own sun opening square has been a very difficult one. And it was interesting as I was typing this because it really like highlighted that to me. And then the opposition would be kind of the full moon moment for Saturn return cycle. And that happens around ages 14 to 16. It's going to depend on like what transiting Saturn is doing. And then like where your placement is, because like there are times where Saturn likes to dip in a sign and dip out. But so 14 to 16 is roughly around the age. And so this is, I kind of identified this as like a fruition of karma around maturity, restrictions, discipline, or lack thereof. And so when we're 16, 14 or 16, this is when like all of the learning we did as children starts to matter. And so if we haven't like, if we're still in a rebellious phase, if we're still if we have difficulty with Saturn things, restriction, boundaries, then we tend to find more challenging consequences for them, because now we have more independence, we have more ability to act on the world. And there's like a sense of, if you hadn't got your stuff together, you're really going to feel it around this age. It's also a time where like children or like, young adults, you're becoming a young adult, right? This is like where you're really like, oh, I'm like a person different from my parents. So I wrote, what is produced from the efforts to mature, abide by, or disregard restriction? So this is a time that's really delicate, I think, because we end up having like people who are basically functioning adults who are still dealing with the restriction of being in their parents' house, but they have this idea of being able to, they want more self-determination. And often, like, if you're not being careful, if you don't have any discipline, you can get into a lot more trouble than you could at ages like 6 to 8, right? And so there's a rebellion against restriction, a desire for self-control, or control over self. And then this is really the beginning of separation from parents. And then I also noticed that this is often when we start learning how to drive. And that's like a real separation point and like independence that comes from like getting away from parents. And then it's also kind of like the time where we have to really buckle down and think about college, or like think about what are we going to do as adults. So there's this forward facing, like, okay, I've culminated at this point, now where am I going with it? Is there any questions or like observations that anyone might have about those ages in their life? Especially if you have Saturn and Pisces, you might have had those challenges come up around those ages related to this talk.
By the way, really quick, Allie, are you sharing a screen right now?
I am. Is it working?
Mm-mm.
No!
I thought it was just me, but I see Kaden just said the same.
Yeah, it cut out
Why?
a while ago. I thought you were just like not sharing, but it's still.
Oh no. Oh my gosh. It's just my notes, which I can totally share. Hold on. Oh my God, how embarrassing. That's hilarious.
It just happened. So we saw your notes before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Let me bring them up. Thank you so much. So maybe this will help with people understanding where I'm coming from. Is that working?
Yes, we're good.
Zoom? That's hilarious. Okay. That lesson learned. Don't move the screen to a different screen. Okay. So I was just talking about these. I was talking about the opening square here and then the opposition. And so those kind of relating to like that full moon moment from going from being a young child to adolescence, and how once you become like 14 or 16, you might have some independence to be able to, drive your car. And if you don't have the discipline or abide by restrictions or boundaries, then you might crush that car, right? Or if you could get very unlucky and, get pregnant at this time, because now you have the responsibility over your body that's also matured, and things of that nature.
The
But
interesting
Oh,
So, sorry. This is an interesting breakdown. I've never
Mhm.
thought of it in terms of this. Like I've always known Saturn is kind of like it's a 30-year cycle. So you got that like midlife crisis and then retirement and then death. And I've never thought to like break it down into smaller parts, like in those different earlier phases as well. I've never really considered that. That's interesting.
Yeah, honestly, I had not thought about it until I did this. So this is also kind of like I was like, oh, let me think of like where Saturn, where's the square challenge, and then I'm like,
Just
oh,
the
it's these
energy
ages.
building.
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I was gonna say I love the way you break this down. It like makes a lot of sense, and I had not thought about it this way before you broke it down with like the opening square, the opposition, and the closing square. Um, I'm curious what like in the ages that aren't covered, are those just like between like 23 and 29, is that just like less significant astrology happening, or like what would
Um,
that time be?
I wouldn't say less significant astrology, because I think it's always important, but I find that the square aspects and the oppositions they tend to be the most, oh, those tend to be the most, hold on, I'm gonna mute them really quick. Those tend to be the most challenging and notable, I guess is the better thing to say. So because of especially the opposition, because the opposition is thought of as in the nature of Saturn. So squares are the nature of Mars and oppositions are the nature of Saturn. And oppositions are thought of as one of the most difficult aspects. But I tend to bring these up because they tend to be crisis points. And so awareness around this crisis point can also help you find significations between um, the phases in between. So like with the opening square, or from the close, they'll use your example, the closing square to the return, you're going to have a trine aspect happening and a sextiling instead, or no, you're going to have a sextiling in that case. And so sextiles tend to be there, that would be the like waning gibbous phase here, but it has a sextile relationship to the natal placement, and sextiles are of the nature of Venus, and they're a lot more harmonious and easygoing, and so you may not even notice your Saturn like waning gibbous phase, right? um and so like I specifically point out these points because I think when you look at, especially with Saturn in general, when you look at the crisis points, it kind of gives you a better idea. They're more prominent in the mind, and so you can really like I think it helps you just think about the significations and then like get a broader understanding of the cycle as a whole.
So
That makes
Allie, is the theory that you could put together, you could sit with someone and go over kind of what's happened at each of these points in time and figure out kind of a theme?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Because it's going to challenge that natal placement. And then you could also, oh, that's getting a little, I was like, then you could also look at their solar returns and then you get their secondary progressions. And I'm like, that's a little much. But absolutely, you can absolutely do this with any planetary cycle. So like if you wanted to work with a shorter cycle, if you worked with, to do Mercury and Venus, they're a little different because they have an evening and morning star phase, and their elliptic around the sun is very different looking than like Mars that goes just all the way through the signs versus before returning to the spot, versus Venus, which does this kind of like back and forth thing like all the way through because she's orbiting the sun, and same thing with Mercury. But you could totally follow Mars and find out where Mars rules your chart and then do the same thing, like, oh, I'm having my Mars opposition, that's why this shit's so fucking difficult. Or I'm having the closing squares, like I have this like action or energy that I'm using, and this is how it's showing up, and so you can definitely look for themes using the squares and oppositions. Absolutely.
I'm actually gonna take a photo of this. I'm not gonna get anyone in it, but I have so much. I have
I
so
did
much
too.
like.
Oh, I
gear
can
specifically
send
regarding mine.
I could
I would-
totally create, I could also share this as a document on Google or something and attach it to this event if anyone is interested.
I would love a copy.
Yeah,
I
that would
love
be
this.
great. Because I know
Yeah,
I
I would love
specifically
that.
have a lot of
What
like
it-
fear surrounding my upcoming return, and so I feel like
Mhm.
this would be a really good way to like prepare better and
Go look.
understanding what's
So
coming.
so the ages that I've listed are pretty rough. And so what you'll do if you're going to go back or go back to like the time is that from your natal placement, you're going to move forward about 7-ish years. Is 7? Just
Mhm.
if you're Saturn in Pisces, then the next your next square would be at Gemini. So you would go, if you have an ephemeris, or if you're just using like actually I can't share this right now because I have another share happening. But if you have an ephemeris, especially a digital one, you can isolate the planet Saturn and then like have it move through month time chunks, and then you can see exactly when Saturn enters Gemini, because that's going to be your opening square after the Saturn return, and then so on and so forth. But if you go back in time, you'll be able to do that as well. Then it would be Virgo. Your Sagittarius would be the closing square, and then your Pisces will be that return. But I guess to get back into because we went through the opposition, so now the closing square would be around the ages 21 to 23. He likes to hang out in a sign for about 2 years, 2-ish years, sometimes a little longer depending. So I try to break this down as like best I could. But so for me, ages 21 to 23, especially since this is like the age you start to get to drink, at least in the States, I thought of it as like the final challenge before the return. And I felt like it was really a warning from Saturn about what has and hasn't worked over this cycle. And so there's a reconciling with the choices and actions taken at the opposition, and then a cleaning up or reconfiguration of what was made manifest from them. So you have to deal with like, okay, when I was 16, I decided that this was the college I wanted to go to. These were the choices I was going to make. And now at ages 21 to 23, this is around the time of like college graduation for a lot of people, or moving out entirely on their own. So you have to like reconfigure and deal with those like what has made manifest around the opposition. And then it's often related. I think the closing square especially is like a releasing point. It's like I have to let go. This is true with the lunar cycle as well. There's like a dispersing or dissemination of what was made at the opposition. And so it's related to a need to release or let go of things, paring down so one can focus on what is important to the exclusion of others. I feel like specifically with Saturn, it's always about when you say yes to something, you have to be aware of that you're saying no to something else. And I have a couple quotes that relate to this later, but it's really like in order to like Jupiter wants to say yes to everything. Yes, you can have that. Yes, you should get that. Yes. And Saturn is like in order to say yes, you must say no. And that saying no and the restriction, like kind of like how a ritual or routine restriction helps you be able to say yes to the things you want to say yes to. And if you don't have your priorities in alignment, which often happens at 21 or 23, you're kind of getting this like, oh, hey, if I don't like get my shit together, I'm not going to be able to do this. And also it's around the time when people have like completely moved out. But I mean, I don't know about you in your early 20s, but I was still looking at my parents for help and looking at them for support and guidance. And I was still like, honestly, until I like had a kid, I didn't even like I'm a stepmom, but until like a kid was in my life and I'm like, oh shit, I'm responsible for this little person. Like I felt like I was still a child. Like there was just like, oh, I could just like sleep in and I can like go drinking, and if I have a hangover, who cares? Or like I can go buy these things and I'll just go play video games. Like it wasn't until like coming up to my return that I'm like, oh shit. I can't do that. That's not an option anymore. But yeah, so this is like that point in time where we're like really the separation is like really happening. It's not quite there yet, especially with the parental units. But that leads us to the return, the big scary return, everyone, that we're all here to talk about. It's really the end of I thought it was an ending because anytime the return happens, anytime a new cycle begins, or like a door opens, another door has to close. And so this is ending the final like endings of what was developed through your first Saturn cycle. And so I've kind of pinned it as an ending of old ways of navigating responsibility and then new responsibilities to grapple with. And so if you were kind of like, you know, loosey goosey with, let's say, your money, that's not a personal example at all. Or if you know, so you were spending, you know, one way or another, now you're like, if I keep doing this way, I'm going to have a lot bigger consequences, and Saturn will punish you in a way. He's also related to punishment, so I like to think of punish, but I know a lot of people that might not be so nice, a nice way to put it. But you will have harsher and harsher consequences for a result of trying to continue the old way if you don't let go of it. And then you get the new responsibilities to grapple with. I tend to think of this time as like people really recognizing their mortality, especially since they're recognizing their parents' age, if their parents are still around, hopefully. And then because of the reconciliation with mortality, it can lead to, hopefully, a reprioritization of time and energy. So you're like, oh, I did all of this up to this age, and wow, like that's how I spent my time. I have new priorities. I have new responsibilities. I have to change how I spend my time and energy with discipline. Um, and then often this is kind of where any loose end that you really haven't tied up yet, or anything that you really haven't like figured out, you'll see the consequences of the choices in like long in the making. This is built up over time. Anything with Saturn, I find, is just like, it's not like hits you right away. That's Uranus will hit you right in the face, and then it'll suddenly like change your whole world. Whereas like, and there's no preparing for Uranus. But Saturn, the blessing of Saturn, I think, is really that he gives you so much time to be aware of like, hey, have you started working on that paper yet? You have a month to do it. You know, it's not like stuff with Saturn tends to, unless he's aspected by Uranus, I think, tends to be things that like you have awareness of, and the only thing is we lack the maturity to recognize what those consequences will be in the long term. And so this is kind of that reckoning point. And then this is really the coming into full adulthood. This is like really the time where you recognize, oh, I'm the grown up now. Like I can't go to mom and dad anymore. Like I'm a solidified adult, and hopefully not everyone makes it, but they're usually fully self-reliant and then independent of the parents. And in some case, they're likely at this point helping their parents. So there's this passing of a torch type of thing that tends to happen at the ages 29 to 30. So also like when you're 29, it's like the last year you can say you're in your 20s. So I've been feeling that. I'm like, shit, I'm gonna be 30. But yeah, so that's kind of like how I've conceptualized the return cycle.
Allie, I'm so obsessed with this. Like having been through all of these stages, like, and through my return, like this puts context to it that makes so much sense. Like I look at my story and there's definitely a theme, you know, and all of the little points and the notes on those specific points make perfect sense.
Dude,
I love this. It's so good.
I'm so glad. This was the last thing I put together after we did all of my research, and I was like, yes.
What is your top 3?
My top 3, I am an Aries rising, a Gemini sun, and a Sagittarius moon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's I like to call it my fuck around and find out squad, because y'all know. You're an astrologer, you get it.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to fuck with you.
Well, no. I mean, like, I fuck around and I find out. I'm not hurting anybody, though. I will get into a playful fight with my Aries. Usually playful. Anyway, is there anything else that we wanted to talk about with the Saturn, like with like going through the whole cycle? Is there any observations, especially from your own charts, that are like coming up for you and you're like, what? Anything like that?
I was thinking about and Allie, I think I mentioned to you my friend who is about to turn 27 and then immediately after, like a week after, go into her Saturn return.
That's wild.
I'm thinking about how because she's going through it on an earlier end, that means she went through all the squares at an earlier end too. And it's almost like like she had to grow up more than other people almost. She also was born and raised on her Saturn line, like an astrocartography.
Oh, that'll do it.
So I'm just thinking about like all the themes for her with like the big Saturn energies that I don't really know exactly what it means, but it feels significant, especially after seeing how it's broken down here.
I love that.
Yeah, but I love it.
I don't want to like I know you have her chart. I wouldn't want to look at it without her permission, but I would like to look at it.
I think she would be open to it, I think.
If you text her, if you could get, I don't like looking at charts without permission because people
Yeah.
don't realize just how personal charts are.
Yeah. I can text her.
Yeah,
right
if you
now.
could text her, if you get a permission to look at it, then like maybe we could also help with like especially she's Saturn and Pisces, correct?
Yeah, Saturn and Sun in Pisces.
Then yeah, we might be able to find some patterns or like help her understand like what this return cycle might look like. I assume she's really early degrees Pisces.
Yeah, she is. Her birthday's February 23rd. Well, I guess that's for Sun, but then also for
in 1994.
1996.
Oh, okay.
So I guess it's not. I remember what you talked about. It's she wasn't in that like original loop that like went in and out of Pisces.
Yeah.
But
I'm one of the oldest Saturn returns. Technically mine, because Saturn came up really close to my natal degree and then retrograded back, I kind of got a little bit of like Saturn standing in front of my door and like, I'll be back for you. And then he went back.
Hey, what do y'all mean by born on the Saturn line? I saw Kayla just ask that and I was wondering too.
Oh yeah, I haven't been able to look at chat, but I think we can address some of the stuff in chat. I mean, we may as well take a time now, right now. Oh, Kayla, yes, I have tons of recommendations for Astro beginners. Yes, absolutely. And then learning lunar cycles will be helpful to track energy levels. That will be particularly helpful, I think, for people who are female bodied, and like also depending on like, because like my menstrual cycle is a little out of sync with the lunar cycle, so it's really going to depend on your own menstrual cycle as well. Oh yeah, I love Ghost of a Podcast. Hold on. But what was the question? Oh, did you want to talk about astrocartography a little bit, Kaden? I think you have more experience with that than I do. I know of it. I don't know much about it.
Yeah, I can mention it. I also don't know all that much about it. I got like really interested in it like a year ago and like hyper fixated on it for a week, which is why I know about it. But it's so essentially astrocartography is like a map of your geographical astrology based on the time and place you were born. And so you can look it up. I believe it's on astro.com or AstroSeek. I would just search like astrocartography chart, and you can see based on where you were born, there are lines for every planet that go through different places, and it can indicate what sort of energy you'll have in that place. So that's why some people will be like, if you've ever heard someone be like, oh, I'm a Philly 10 but a Chicago 6. Like some people are literally just like have like I guess what that means, some people are like, oh, people find me hotter in this city than I am in this other city. And that could be like, oh, you have your Venus line there. Like people literally just find you charming and beautiful more so than other places. And
so interesting.
I love it. It's so interesting how it works like that. And so like a lot of astrologers will tell people to look at where like your Venus, your Jupiter, or your Mercury lines are, and those could be really great places for you to live for certain things. Or like I mentioned, my friend who was born and raised on her Saturn line, that's a really hard place to live. There's a lot of restrictions there. Like a lot of things just didn't flow for her. And I mean that was true based on her life, but it also is explained by Saturn. And yeah, you can kind of go through every single planet and the nodes, and it'll tell you what sort of energy you have. It'll also show you if it's ascending or descending, or if it's the MC or the IC, and that will hold a different energy for that planet as well. And yeah, it's very interesting.
Interesting. I'm gonna look that up immediately.
Yeah.
I've been curious about astrocartography because I wonder how you tie in the birth chart. Because like, would you like, let's say you have like a really bona fide Mars. Like, let's say you're getting a trine from Jupiter to the Mars. The Mars is in Capricorn and Saturn is well dignified. Like, would you want to live on your Mars line then? For you personally, because Mars is like a really and you're born during the night. Like, let's get every single like possible like awesome like Mars like dignity. Like generally you would want to avoid Mars because it's considered a malefic and tends to bring challenge and difficulty. But if you had a really bona fide Mars, then would you want to live there? I don't know. Just a thought. But yeah, if you get I would love to hear about your friend Saturn story. It sounds like it's a rough one.
Yeah, let
I
me
think
text her.
I'm gonna move it to because I think 27 is one of the earlier. So she's I'm gonna put it to 28. I don't know. I'm just futzing around with the number. It really depends.
She's like definitely on the early end of it, I would say. Like I don't think
Yeah.
I would start till I'm at least 29.
So I tend to put 29 because like that's around the time when Saturn is going to be close by degree. But when Saturn enters Pisces, if you have a Saturn in Pisces, like you're going to kind of feel that shift. And I would for everybody in here who is like really paying attention to this Saturn cycle for themselves, I would watch to see what comes up for you the day that Saturn ingresses into Pisces, which is March 7th. So in a little more than a month, a little less than a month away.
That's interesting. I didn't know it was that day. That's my brother's birthday, and he's coming out of his Saturn return, and he is a Pisces, so
Oh,
feels
good for him.
significant.
Yeah, just like it's not gonna be unless you're like me, which it's gonna be like on the degree and then suddenly hitting the house and hitting the sign. Like it may be just like a theme that comes up or like a small thing, but it often the ingress of a planet or even just like look at the news, like look at what happens that day in the news. Hold on a minute.
Did you?
Just like look at what's going on in the news and like what's coming up that day because it's going to give you some clue about what this transit is going to be for you in general or like for the collective as well. But now that we've talked about Saturn at
Allie,
length.
let me ask you a quick question before I
Oh yeah,
forget.
sure.
When you're looking at Saturn cycles for other people, what kind of an orb do you give it? Like, do you go exact degree or do you look at when it enters that house? Or do you go like 3-degree orb or something?
So orb is like, okay, so like I would say like to use the word orb, I use engagement range, but that's like more of a traditional thing. I use a 3-degree engagement range or like orb for basically every single planet except for the moon because the moon has I would consider a larger range of engagement because she moves so goddamn fast. So yeah, so by degree today or tomorrow I'm moving into my Saturn return by degree, even though Saturn is still in Aquarius at this time, because I'm like 0 degrees Pisces Saturn. Or is it my first degree? I forget, but it's like right there. So like today, like basically in the next week or so, I'm really going to feel this something.
Exciting. Do you have an idea of what it's going to address?
Yeah.
Tell us.
So for me, I can get into this a little bit, but we'll talk about it. I think we can talk about it like more at length during the personal chart exploration. But like for me, it's really coming up around money. I've made a lot of choices with my money that I'm like, wow, not good. It's about a separation with my mom. That's coming up in a big way, and it's like tied up with my property and my home, and so that's been not fun. And like for me as a Saturn and Pisces in the 12th, a lot of it has been my fear of intimacy and the ways I sabotage myself in regards to those, particularly in relationships because my Jupiter is ruling. So we'll have to look at Jupiter in the chart as well to really give a full picture of what's happening to Saturn and Pisces from my perspective, because Jupiter rules Pisces, at least by tradition. So like my Jupiter is in my 7th house in Libra, which is also Saturn's exaltation, and is ruling Saturn and Pisces in the 12th. So there's something about the Saturn and Pisces 12th house story that is being tied back into the material of my 7th house, my relationships and things like that. And then it's also like, it's a lot. But like that's kind of like the brief of like where my Saturn return is already kind of like creeping up on me, and like I'm feeling the like, oh, I have to, like, I'm glad I've done a lot of work already. It's really showing me like where I did well. But it's also like you still have work to do, and because you did that work, you'll be able to withstand and like hold out well. I think I've like prepared myself well enough. Ooh, sorry, I saw Kaden got permission from your friend to read their chart. But yeah, so that's where mine's been.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing.
No problem. I think it's really important to like share and learn about each other's charts, because like we have such a personal experience with the planets. And so when we can express like, this is what my experience with Saturn has been like, and like talk about it, I think there's a lot to learn and a lot of like just gold to be mined there. But to go into Pisces significations, I would love to hear from you guys, like especially if you have prominent Pisces in your chart, or you've like interacted with Pisces energy, like what do you feel like Pisces, like what is the energy of Pisces? I think is the best way to talk about it.
So I think I can go.
Yeah,
I have
absolutely.
hi.
I don't think we got your name and pronouns, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, I am Sthiti, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm from India. So yes, I actually have Pisces in my Sun, Mars, and Saturn as well.
Are you
so
okay? I'm sorry, I don't mean that I don't mean that in a mean way, but wow, that's a lot. But yeah, Pisces stellium, got it.
So I see a lot of like, and none of my friends are water signs or Pisces. So I see a lot of like, from my differences with them, I can point out that I have a hard time being pinned down to follow structures, to take commands, to fit into hierarchies, institution, to have a set regime in life. I think I would really like conversations or career or relationships where I can flow more smoothly. And I guess that is the area that I'm struggling with right now as well, in career and relationships, given my Saturn and Pisces. So
yeah. Well, especially with the Mars and Saturn, I feel like Mars hates to be told what to do generally. So like that feeling of like no. So I wonder how much conflict there is, or just like feeling like going my own way is really the answer. Would you be open for us to look at your chart later?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yay. I think it would be a really good example, just because you have so much Pisces energy that I feel that your Saturn return is really going to be loud for you.
Yeah, I absolutely feel coming.
Awesome. Anybody else? Thank you so much, Suti.
Thank you.
I have a lot of Pisces energy in my life. I don't personally have any in my, at least like big six. But the universe keeps sending me Pisces. Like my best friend's a Pisces, someone I'm kind of dating is a Pisces, my brother's a Pisces, and they all have like Pisces stelliums. And
wow.
I'm Mars ruled, I'm a Scorpio rising, and with significant fixed energy and Gemini, and I typically like butt heads a lot with Pisces energy, and I find that my like blunt honesty can really hurt them, and they find it insensitive. And so I feel like from my perspective, I see Pisces as like a very sensitive, on the edge of like brooding in their emotions energy on one side of it. On another side of it, I agree with the like intuitive psychic, like yeah, I feel like big romance energy too.
Oh, absolutely.
Like everyone who I know who has Pisces energy will like talk to someone romantically for a month and then like think about them for the next 15 years and as their biggest heartbreak. Like
Okay, yes, this is definitely going to go into, that's like a perfect example of like Pisces as the exaltation of Venus. So
yeah.
like that like yearning, that desire, like the love, the romance, that's so Pisces, Venus and Pisces especially. I wonder if, so if you're Scorpio rising, that would put
It's my 5th house.
Taurus in the 7th. Oh, wait, Scorpio is in the, oh, your Pisces is in the 5th?
So yeah, Pisces in the 5th, Taurus in the 7th. Yeah.
Well, we already have a date set for me looking at your chart, so I'll have to like look at your chart and go, oh yeah, this is why you keep attracting Pisces, like duh. Like I think partially also just the Scorpio rising, just the water sign of affinity, will do that.
I feel like we like have conflicting water sign energy though, because like the Scorpio water sign I feel like is kind of like mean and sensitive, and Pisces is kind of like, I just want to be loved. Why don't you just be nice to me, sensitive? And that's where we're like this.
Oh, also, I feel like we're getting a little derailed here, but I love talking. What's going on in Gemini in your chart again?
My
Sun
Gemini sun and my Venus in the 8th house. So
okay. So that's already in a like a whole sign square relationship to all that stuff in Pisces. So like
and
I think that
my Pluto as well in Sag.
Yeah. That'll do that. Was there anyone else who wanted to comment on Pisces before I like kind of go through my little listy list?
You know what? All the like people in my life who are like have a lot of Piscean energy are the sweetest, most imaginative little alcoholics.
Yes. Yeah.
Like so sweet, like so gentle, you know, but also like I'm gonna tear down. I'm gonna live in this alternate reality and self-destruct.
Yeah. Yeah,
For
that is something
me,
I see
I've really seen Pisces energy and like that connection to spirituality and just like showing the interconnectedness of life and like that aspect. Like both of my kids have heavy Pisces energy, and someone once called them they act as channels for me, and I really felt that like they're very spiritually connected, and like I've really seen that like interconnected spiritual aspect in my life in regards to it.
I love that. Yes, yes to all of the things. Like one thing that I find that comes up a lot, and I think like to go through like the list in kind of order, the one thing that I feel like is like most like key to understanding Pisces is like yearning and the feeling of yearning. And like Pisces comes at the time, like if we're going with the tropical zodiac and not the sidereal, there's a truck. It comes at the time of the year when the light is about to overcome the darkness. And so it's right before the vernal equinox. And so there's this feeling Pisces is so close to reaching out of darkness, and it like so close you can like taste it and smell it but not quite there. And so there's this to me, I've felt this like yearning, this desire, this like hopefulness, but they have to reconcile with the darkness that they're dealing with. So some of the significations I've put down, the kind of I feel like really key into that yearning, or like divine discontentment. It's like they know there's something better. They have like this feeling and this like inability to put into words, this thing they're unable to put into words of like redemption from the dark. They can't like quite reach it, but they know it's there. And so there's the hope and the faith, the redemption and salvation, emotional and empathetic, so they can really feel into subtle worlds. And they have a connection to be able to like just, I find that Pisces people, especially with the symbol as the fish, they're so permeable. Like their emotional life is so permeable to other people. Though with Saturn in Pisces, since this is kind of the top of the topic we're really going over, is that because Saturn is like the boundary making and the walls, like Saturn and Pisces people, especially from my perspective at least, they have that deep sensitivity, but because of that, they find it really difficult to be around people. So instead, what they'll do is they'll put up the wall and they'll put up the boundaries and they'll retreat into isolation in order to be able to have control over the way they feel. Because at least from my story, that's something I've really witnessed. They're very imaginal and dreaming, and so they have a connection to worlds beyond our worlds. But because they have that connection and it feels so real and it's like it's almost there, they have a really hard time being material. They have a really hard time with incarnation and being like in the physical and dealing with what the darkness of being like reconciling spirit and matter or dark and light. And so they often are very escapist and they can be delusional at times, especially if they're just completely lost in that world. So like I think one of the highest expressions of Pisces is the ability to sit in the dark and like be in full awareness and connection with light. They don't have to run away. They don't have an aversion to their darkness or the darkness that they witness, even though they feel it so deeply and they're so empathic. They are able to hold space for both. It's also related to like sinners and saints, and so Pisces can often be seen as like people of the cloth, people who are deeply devoted to spiritual matters and things like that. Dissolution is one I've put here because Pisces tends to, again, with kind of that Neptune affinity, has kind of like able to like dissolve boundaries, which can be good and bad. There's no real like there's pros and cons to being able to dissolve the boundaries between you and another person. And then they're very intuitive and psychic because of their connection to the unseen, essentially. And then to kind of get into the qualities, more of like the stat sheet of Pisces. In my tradition or in the ancient tradition, it's ruled by Jupiter, and I would say has a great affinity with Neptune. And I think we should talk about Neptune in this, especially because Neptune is going to be in Pisces through I believe, either most of or all of the Saturn and Pisces transit. And I think Saturn is going to be conjunct Neptune in Pisces, but I haven't looked that far. The exaltation of Venus. So we talked about that like yearning, the sensitivity, the significations of like beauty and love are really, and romance in particular, are really put on high in Pisces. It's the sign of the fish. The polarity is feminine, and so we can talk about polarity or masculine, feminine sides. Triplicity is water, so it's a water element, and then the quadruplicity or the modality is mutable, and so that ability to be both like it's a transition stage. It's also known as double-bodied, and so there are different ways of understanding what double-bodied means, but it usually is like able to start and like work on things, but like also move fluidly through different states. And so mutable water, a feminine mutable water really gives ocean. Like ocean is one of the best symbols I could use to really describe Pisces. And I mentioned, it transitions us out of winter and into spring at the vernal equinox. But is there anything else that we wanted to add to Pisces before we moved on?
I just put it in the chat, but I thought about how Pisces rules the 12th house. So kind of connecting it to what you said about like the unseen world. Like I think of 12th house as like everything that lives below our conscious level of awareness, kind of like the unseen fears, the unseen emotions. And I feel like Pisces have a unique ability to tap into that in a really like divine way.
Yeah. I don't what do you call the technique of Pisces ruling the 12th house? Because I've heard it called the 12-letter alphabet. But I want to know what that technique is for you.
I guess how I've seen it is that like going from like 1 to 12, like Aries rules the first, so then or we're going around, Pisces would be the 12th. I don't know if that explains it.
I just like, so I like the thing that I find with like assigning the sign rulership to the houses is that like sometimes I feel like for people it can collapse some. I think it can be used to good effects. I think there's definitely application for it, but I sometimes see that it can collapse meaning for people. And so, but I definitely see that there is like what's the word, affinity as well, like Aries being like the is often thought of as a birth or a beginning, or like, and it's often related to what the statement I am, right? And it can be a little bit selfish, and so there's this sign like the idea of the first house being assigned to the self and is the start of the birth chart. Like there's definitely alignment, and I think it's not a mistake that there are 12 signs and 12 houses, and that even with like the differences of the house topics, there's still an affinity between like the signs and the houses that they occupy or are like related to in that. But yes, let's move, unless anyone wanted to add anything else to Pisces. All right. So let's move into Saturn and Pisces. So this is the part of the talk where I'm going to get into some difficult things. There's definitely there's eugenics, genocide, mass murder. There's some nice things, a few, addiction and drug use. So I just wanted to put that out there because I'm also recording it, and also for anybody here, if that's not something you want to really talk about like and or like really address right now and you're not in that space, that's completely fine. I just wanted to give everyone like a heads up before I like just dive into some really difficult topics. I won't be talking about anything in like detail, but you know, just a good trigger warning. I think that's always good to give. So this is the resource that I use primarily to gather like this information, and if you want to, I will link, this will be available as a doc or a PDF or something later, and that'll have like an active link so you can find this on your own time. So don't feel like, you know, you gotta screenshot or click anything right now. But I went back through the 1900s up to now and kind of looked at what was going on at the time, and I've written the dates here just to kind of give like a better like idea of like, because sometimes Saturn does that thing where he moves in and he says, okay, I'm leaving, and he goes back out when he retrogrades. But so like the first Saturn and in Pisces kind of like transit that we have here. Oh, I should have written this 2038, my bad. Is from 1935 to 1938. And so if you're familiar with the time of 1935, you would know that this is around the time of the rise of Nazi Germany. And so this is not, it's interesting because this is not the time when like we're getting into, this is not the time of Kristallnacht or like the like overt violence is really happening. This is like kind of like the gearing up. And so we get the Nuremberg race laws, which are passed, which strip Jewish people of their citizenship. And then we have the Lebensborn eugenic program. I am going to butcher some pronunciation, forgive me. I'm just a little American girl doing her best. And so I thought that this was interesting. These two specific things were interesting because it was about using structure and law to restrict and to like police what it meant to be German. And that a lot of what happened in Nazi Germany at this time was about the redemption of the Aryan race, right? And so like it wasn't until Saturn moved into Aries that we got the violence, which Aries is all, you know, guns a-blazing kind of thing. It's the warring, it's a more of a warring sign, but Pisces is not. And so it was really more about like, you know, the control. This is also the time of the Great Purge in the Soviet Union, which was when Stalin did some mass murder. These are not fun topics, but also like to give some context as well, there are other transits that are happening at this time that are aspecting Saturn. So this is not just Saturn and Pisces is just we're going to have genocide happen like right away. It's more of that Saturn is activating topics and is also commenting on like another planet interacting with it. I believe there was a Pluto aspect happening at this time, which is really brings up some of the instinctual and difficult and ugly parts of like the human consciousness. And so I think that's why so much of this is like about purity, quote unquote. And so this is when Stalin is removing political opponents and enemies. Also, I bring this up because this is around in China. This is around the time that Mao Zedong comes into power. Because about 28 years later, which is the Saturn return of Mao Zedong coming into power, is when he becomes a cult of personality. And so I thought it was interesting to watch the Saturn story of his political rise really coincide with Saturn transits. So this is also the beginning of the Social Security Act in the USA, the development of the Hoover Dam and the Ohio River flood. And I have them highlighted because these are things that I have, oh, this one should be highlighted too. These are things that I have like some themes that keep coming up that I thought were interesting, but there's like constructions of dams, which is the control and restriction of water, and floods, which is the lack of control and the loss caused by water. And it also aligns with some of Valen's significations of Saturn being to signify death by water. And so I thought it was interesting that we saw multiple dams getting constructed during Saturn and Pisces and floods that happen at this time. In more lighter note, cultural events that happened at this time is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was one of the first full-length animated films happened under Saturn and Pisces. And like this Saturn and Pisces, because of the imaginal aspect of Pisces, I think we see a lot of like really big animated and like imaginal worlds really come into the consciousness that have like structure and like they're like built out. Like The Hobbit was published at this time, and then this is like Lovecraft's heyday. Like this is when Lovecraft was really writing like all of his big stuff. And even Dr. Seuss's first children's book is published at this time, and Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, which I might reread. It's a short read that might even have some like might give some more clues or like have that Saturn and Pisces signature. But then we move into 1964 and 1967. And so this is around the time of the height of the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam protests. And so I believe that there was a Uranus aspect happening at this time, which really gives that rebellious, revolutionary, innovative, energy, a venue, and like a channel. And so it's also interesting that it's like in regards to a collective and like what is and like a responsibility to like being empathetic and understanding we're all one and not wanting to cause harm. I feel like Pisces energy has such a deep emotional connection, and also interestingly enough, Martin Luther King Jr., who led the Selma to Montgomery marches and the I Have a Dream speech, is a Pisces moon. And so there's this like signature of Pisces, I think, that comes up, particularly in the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam protests. This is also like a Saturn return for the Social Security Act, and that's when Medicare and Medicaid are established. So again, this is like a social responsibility, feeling like I have to take care of and have responsibility towards a collective, or like what is like what is the light in this darkness? How do we transform a dark matter into like a betterment for people? I feel like Saturn and Pisces has a deep responsibility to like spiritual things, and like because it's interconnected and that feeling, that emotional empathetic feeling, it tends to like approach that and like, okay, what do we have to change in the world? What structure do we have to build to actually like take care of people, if that makes sense? This is also another flood of December 1964. I didn't really look too much into the flood. I just know it's a flood. And I was like, yes. And then LSD is made illegal at this time. And so this was like the height of the flower power. This is when all of the baby boomers were doing drugs and having sex. But I think it's interesting that it's like, because Saturn Pisces is so related to altered states of mind and connecting to something bigger than oneself, and like sensing and feeling worlds, and also escaping from the physical, that there's some restriction made on a drug that does exactly that. So I thought that was notable. Italy had a really hard time with both a flood, which destroyed many artworks, which Pisces is often related to art and artistic creativity, and then a tidal wave that hit Venice also happened at this time. So I would not be surprised to hear about more floods coming up, or like issues with water, plumbing, irrigation, things like that. But definitely, like, being overwhelmed by water seems to be a theme that keeps coming up. And then to bring back Mao Zedong, going back to history in China, is that this is when he becomes a real cult of personality. So cults are really coming up a lot as well, especially in the next cycle we hear more about cults. But I think it's really interesting that this is the Saturn return of his rise to power. His little red book becomes a manifesto for revolutionaries, and it also leads them to purge non-believers. So again, we get that desire to purify or redeem something through violence, unfortunately, or through death, which is another signification of Saturn. And it also, I think, because of that Uranus aspect, which I should have noted here, but I felt like I might be adding too many layers. It destroyed China's traditional culture and just massacred millions. So don't love that. But it's interesting to see the themes that keep coming up over and over. And if at any time, if you want to interrupt me, please, if you have questions. This is all. I put a lot of interest into the history, because I think when we look at the themes, we go back, we can get like a better idea of what might be coming for us, especially with aspects we might see. But if there's any questions or like comments so far, I would love to hear that.
I briefly looked into, because I was curious about the different charts of like prominent civil rights activists.
Mm-hmm.
And Malcolm X has his only Pisces placement is his Uranus, and I find that really interesting, just given society's like views of Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King, being Martin Luther King Jr.'s moon in Pisces versus Uranus. That I feel like that explains a lot of how
Yes.
the US like sees them differently.
Yeah, because that would make Martin Luther, well, the moon would be more, I think, easier to digest than a Uranus, right? Like Uranus being the rebellion, the rebel, the no, like I won't be restricted. I wonder, I would love to see more of his chart. I looked up some significant figure. I happen to know Martin Luther King Jr.'s moon placement off the top of my head, especially since he made the "I have a dream" speech, and dreams are often associated with Pisces in this way.
Yeah.
But the only historical figures I've found were Saturn in Pisces, because I wanted to focus in on that placement. But I would love to look more into that. And then in South Africa, this is again another Saturn return story that I'm noting, is that Nelson Mandela makes the "I am prepared to die" testimony at his sentencing before being imprisoned. Which I wish I had a chart for Nelson Mandela. I would love to know. But later on, actually, it hit the Pisces return of his imprisonment is the time when he gets, I think, elected into office. If I'm not incorrect. No, that's historical figures. Where is it? I know it is. I just cannot find it because I'm looking too fast. Oh yeah, first multiracial elections, and Nelson Mandela becomes president. So that's a crazy Saturn story to me, to go from imprisonment to president, right? And some of the cultural highlights of this time is that the Beatles were at the top of their day. This is like they held the top 5 positions of the top 40. And John Lennon, I thought this was funny, announced his band was more popular than Jesus, which is also, I believe, there are, there are theories that Jesus, one, came during the age of Pisces, if we want to talk about the ages, which I only know a little bit of. And then two, like, is a big, I think, one of the, to understand Pisces as like an archetype, I think Jesus is a wonderful like figure to do that with. Then also, this is an interesting thing that came up was multiple times where Saturn returns, is that photographs from space, like photographs of planets and photographs, I think one is like, this one is Surveyor 1 sending thousands of photos from the moon, and then I believe in the next Saturn cycle we get, Saturn and Pisces cycle, we get planet or photographs of a moon from Pluto, of like a Pluto moon. So it's like completely different like scales but similar theme. Lots of the Church of Satan was formed here in during this time by Anton LaVey in San Francisco. So like there's lots of religious things that keep coming up with Saturn and Pisces, or Pisces stuff. So a structure, a church was created. And it's also kind of revolutionary and rebellious, the Church of Satan, right? Like a little bit like in the face of like traditional structures, which I think is that Uranus influence. Tom and Jerry had its first worldwide broadcast. The Sound of Music won Best Picture at the Oscars. Sidney Poitier, I'm gonna butcher this. Is it Poitier? I don't know. I know someone must know this actor's name, but became the first African American to win. I've said it before and I'm just blanking now. To win an Oscar for Best Actor in Lilies of the Field. Star Trek, which I think is a really wonderful, like, it gives me Aquarius vibes, but the Star Trek TV series premiered in the US, and we get the first Mothman sighting at Point Pleasant in West Virginia. And so there's like this theme that keeps coming up of cryptids as well. So we'll get cryptids, UFO sightings, and culture, and like New Age spirituality all kind of like are cropping up around Pisces time. I think there's something to that. So now we're gonna get into probably the Pisces, like Saturn and Pisces transit that we were all born under, is from 93 to 96. More specifically, the 93 June, like he was in Saturn and Pisces. Saturn was in Pisces in June of 1993, but like for the vast majority of the cycle, he was in it was in 1994 to 1996. So just like most of 93 did not have Saturn and Pisces. We're thinking more Saturn Aquarius. So this is more of a tidbit, but like MS Estonia, a ship sank in the Baltic Sea, killing like over 800 people. And again, I just highlight this again because Valens talks about Saturn ruling over or having significations of death by sea or violent death by water, which is odd to think of when I think of like the quality of Saturn being dry and cold. So it's interesting to see that this water thing keeps coming up, especially when Saturn is in Pisces. So an unfortunate event, but aligned with the astrological energies of the time. In the United States, O.J. Simpson was arrested for the murder and then acquitted after a long show trial. So I think a lot of us are familiar with the O.J. Simpson story. And I think that every time, like, I think that we'll probably get something coming up again around the O.J. Simpson story in the next 2 years when either this transit perfects, like the return perfects for this trial, we might hear something again come up. And then Kurt Cobain, I think one of the most like Pisces, Saturn and Pisces, like Pisces stellium stories is just really broad, or not broad, like loud, is his alleged suicide, which we won't get into the conspiracy theory about that, but like, allegedly committed suicide. And yeah, he died shortly after Saturn entered Pisces, but had not returned to the degree. But he has, I believe, 4 planets in Pisces. I believe Mars is there as well, and I think Mars is earlier degree. So I think this has something to do. I think you could consider it part of his Saturn return story. And yeah. So in England, the Church of England ordains the first female priests, which I think is interesting. I just thought I'd bring up some like things happening with religious institutions. In Russia, the fallout of the collapse of the Soviet Union is really taking a toll on the economy. And this like becomes the breeding ground for the first Chechen War that happened basically during the entire span of Saturn and Pisces, which I think is odd. But in China, there's a lot of little things happening during 1993. I think for the most part, 1993 was like a simple, like not as nearly as difficult of a Saturn and Pisces transit as some of the previous ones. But the construction of the Three Gorges Dam is started in China. So another dam construction. France tested nuclear bombs in the Pacific Ocean, which was causing outcry, but I think it's interesting that it was nuclear bombs in the ocean. So again, back to that Pisces stuff. We have the Rwandan genocide beginning at this time. So again, back to this racial purity theme that keeps coming up. And then Israel-Palestine difficulty, a peace process fails when the Israeli prime minister was assassinated. And then, yes, I don't know much about this. I don't know if I'll comment on it, but I thought it was interesting that there was a part of this conflict had an event of a shooting from the Cave of the Patriarchs, which like Saturn is primo patriarch as well. But again, it's race relations that are just difficult. We have a doomsday cult in Japan, fun stuff. And so there's like this one in particular, we have lots of like doomsday cults and like with like mass murder happening, multiple that have come up. We have some bright spots in this as well. So the doomsday cult in Japan is Amu Shinrikyo carried out some deadly attacks on Tokyo subway. And then the Order of the Solar Temple committed a series of murders and mass suicides as well. In South Africa, this is, I think, one of the brighter things is Nelson Mandela becoming president in some of the first multiracial elections. And it's the Saturn return of his imprisonment. And they also abolished capital punishment. So like there's like two aspects because of the dichotomy of Pisces, I think the two fish, one swimming up and one swimming down, like there's a reaching for light and then like a sinking back into the darkness. So there's this real like dichotomy of the expression of it. So like it's not that it has it's the duality, I think, and the mutability of Pisces that really gives that stark contrast. And then cultural events. The first Pokemon game came out at this time, which I think is wonderful. New Age spirituality goes mainstream. PlayStation game system was launched. Huge growth in the use of psychedelics and the UFO culture. The X-Files TV started, and then this is the first photograph of Pluto and its moon, Chiron or Chiron. It's not Chiron. Was taken from the Hubble Space Telescope. The Loch Ness monster was confirmed as a hoax. So again, more cryptid stuff. Jurassic Park, and the groundbreaking CGI dinosaurs, biggest grossing film for the next 4 years. The Lion King became the highest grossing animated film. Schindler's List won 7 Oscars. Like Saturn and Pisces might be really difficult in a lot of aspects based on the history, but also like culturally, like we get some of the best stories and some of the best like imaginal worlds from Saturn and Pisces. So like Netflix will be great. Toy Story was the first full-length animated computer animated film to be released, and Waterworld, which I thought was really funny, became the most expensive film ever made at the time and was beset with problems, and at one point the set collapsed during a hurricane, which is just for the symbolism. But yeah, that was a lot. Thank you guys for sticking with me. But if there's anything like that like stuck out to people or like that you wanted to comment on, I would love to give you that time, that space, please.
I just wanted to mention this is like super exhaustive. You've done a great job at putting this together. Like mind is blown.
Yeah, I have it set for 12, but I might go about 30 minutes longer if people have time. Just so we can look at some personal charts. I'm gonna mention briefly the historical figures. But to bring up some of the historical themes really quick is that we got destruction by floods and then dam constructions. We have death cults and mass murder being a thing that like comes up, genocide, racial purity, and then the redemption of like trying to purify a race or like rid the darkness, quote unquote, the externalization of an internal process essentially. Um, and so the redemption of like trying to redeem a race by violence and death. And then, but the building of imaginal worlds and stories seems to be a huge highlight that happens with Saturn and Pisces. So like, it's very interesting that we can create structure and build out this worlds to the point that it's like so real enough that it can be played in. So I think that's interesting. And the cryptids and UFO thing is interesting. And then we have the drugs, mind altering substances, and addiction comes up a lot here. Um, so just to bring up some historical figures that have Saturn in Pisces, we have Jean-Paul Sartre, which is an existentialist philosopher. I think that kind of he's he's very disconnected from his Piscean like emotions, but I think that he really has like a profound way of looking at he's the one that I believe like really popularized and like developed nihilism. So it's interesting that there's this sort of disconnection from like the world has no meaning. So there's this feeling of like having to develop meaning or feeling really lost. The most prominent Saturn and Pisces story besides Kurt Cobain to me is Frida Kahlo. And if you know anything about Frida Kahlo's history, you will know that she had an extremely difficult life beset with tons of health problems. But she had like this because of her confinement and restriction due to a trolley accident that she suffered, which punctured her abdomen and like resulted in several health complications, the inability to have children, and like spine issues. She was basically bedbound for a lot of her life, and she was confined to her bed, but by being confined to her bed, it pushed her towards her art and her like portraiture. And so it was all about like expressing through images and imaginal worlds of like her inner turmoil and like her inner self. And it gained her so like fame and popularity and many lovers as well. Like this lady was getting it. She was all I was just really surprised, like, oh yeah, she's also very she was a communist revolutionary, and also like wore suits, didn't shave her lip or like do hair removal. I believe she was also a bisexual, so she was just like she was a very cool lady. But her Saturn return stories really difficult because around the time of her Saturn return, she had her third miscarriage and she separated from Diego Rivera, her husband, who she met during her Saturn closing square. And during the second closing square, or the last closing square, she had to have her foot amputated. And she had lost the will to live and attempted suicide several times before successfully doing so, um, leaving a suicide note to saying that um, that she I forget exactly what she says, but she says she never wants to return. So that feeling of just never wanting to be material again, or like just having so much difficulty in the space of incarnation. Um, Rodney King is also a Saturn in Pisces, another really difficult Saturn in Pisces story. I don't want to get into it too much here because we're running low on time and I want to make sure we have time to go over some charts. Again, Kurt Cobain, another difficult Saturn in Pisces. Unfortunately, there's a lot of really difficult Saturn in Pisces stories because Saturn is a difficult planet. But I think one that I kind of feel is a more brighter Saturn in Pisces story is Bjork, who is able to take like and express kind of that imagination and kind of communicate and transmit something that is like hard to put into words. Very creative woman. And also on her Saturn return, she left her band and went solo and began writing techno and electric music at this time. And that's I think when she really blew up, was from a loss. She ended up becoming a lot bigger. And then Megan Thee Stallion, also a Saturn in Pisces, and she just released an album called Traumazine, which is all about like mental health and issues she's having. And she's also has a very difficult story as well, but like, we don't have to get into that. But that's all to say. I don't think I want to go through too much of this archetypal stuff that I've written, unless people really want to, but I think now, since we're already going to go over, if people want to bring up charts and give me data, we can start bringing up charts and looking at those together, because I don't want to take up I put too much into the history part. I should have narrowed it down, but I was just so interested.
I loved it. I loved it. So
Okay.
good.
I'm so glad. I was like, I really hope I'm not like boring everybody by like, here's some genocide, here's some doomsday cults, like here's another flood. But I really wanted to illustrate like the cyclical nature of like the themes. It's not, it rhymes, it never like comes back exactly the same way, but it's interesting to see when like, oh, like this is a Saturn return for this moment or for this like experience, like this like event, and so seeing it kind of develop over time I just thought was really interesting. But who would like to bring up their chart first?
I would love to go first, simply because I have 2 little babies. I'm like running back and forth.
Absolutely. Let's look at your chart first. Are you on your phone or are you on the computer?
I'm on a laptop. I can pull it up if that's easiest.
I could pull it up as well, whatever is easier for you.
Okay. Do you want me to just give you my birth information then?
If
Or you
you're
already have it?
absolute, did I ever do a delineation for you? For a full moon or new moon? Okay. So I don't have your chart. By the way, anybody who's ever given me their birth data to tell you about the new moon or full moon, I have saved it. It's in my stash forever and I'm never gonna let it go. Okay,
Here,
let's make a new chart.
I'll put my information in the chat for you.
Thank you. December. And you have Saturn in Pisces?
No, I'm an old lady. Okay, I have Saturn in. I just wanted to come to the class, so if y'all want to skip me, actually, that's totally okay too.
I just want to make sure that we prioritize someone who has who's going to experience the return, since that was kind of the thing. I forgot to ask. I'm sorry.
Nope, that's okay. That's okay.
So who has the Saturn in Pisces besides little old me that would like to go?
You can do mine.
You want to do okay? Let's do Cheyenne. And then after, I'd really like to do Stuti, because I know you have that crazy stellium, and I think that would be one, if you're comfortable. Obviously, we don't have to. But I think it would be an excellent teaching tool. And then
Do you have my info?
I don't know. I'm about to look. Have you ever given me your data?
No.
Then I do not.
In our private chat, but I didn't know if you had it.
No, I don't have it. Let me do this. And then July 13th.
I'm nervous. Okay.
You're
nervous excitement. Okay.
Good. It's all the same energy. So 07/13, 1994. And then at 6:34 a.m. Ooh. Kingston.
That's Ontario, Canada.
Oh, okay, interesting. Let's go. And is this the time is very specific. Are you quoting a birth certificate?
My mother. So
Mother's memory. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, that's fine. It's a rating for data sources, so that I'm like, ooh, okay. So you have a very early degree Leo. And so let me change the share very quick.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you can share it. I want to see.
Yes, absolutely.
Check me out.
Oop. Can you see? And let me know if everyone can see it, because last time I did this, I fucked up.
Yeah, I can see it. Looks good.
Okay. So I use whole sign houses, which means that So this chart may look a lot different than what you're used to seeing. And so I'm just letting you know that I use a different house system. But one of the, I guess I would say, like, weaknesses of this house system is if you have early degree chart, like this one, you have really early degree Leo ascendant. If your time is wrong by like maybe even 5 minutes, this could shift the entire chart very dramatically. So some of the delineations I give or like we talk about might not resonate for you. And if that's the case, then that would put you into a Cancer rising instead of a Leo rising. So that's just a heads up. If something is like, that's not it, or that doesn't work, then that might be the reason. But we're gonna just look at the placements that we have here. So we have Saturn in the 8th, ruling what? Your 7th and 6th house. Okay. And then let's put up the transit. Boop boop. Oh, so extra. Let's see. This should add, there we go. Okay. So this is around the time that Saturn will enter your 8th house. You're also, I mean, you've probably already been feeling a ton of stuff right now because you've been having, you're gonna have this, like, you've been having the Jupiter going over your Saturn, and then you're having the Neptune here that's kind of hanging out in your 8th house. And then you have the Sun and Mercury that are gonna come in around the same time in March, which is interesting. But the 8th house, does anyone have, like, I have my own delineations for the 8th house, but like what topics do y'all associate with the 8th that you know of?
I usually associate I know this might not be how you read, but I associate with like Scorpio, so it's mental health, shared resources, death, things of that nature. It can be more like, I read it as like a Pluto ruled, so a deep intensity there as well.
I think the affinity still definitely gives like a lot of the significations. And so yeah, one of the best ways I found to like understand 8th house topics, or like any house, is to see what house is opposite and to see how are they part of the same polarity, like how like, you know, how do they comment on or are opposites of each other, because by nature they have an opposition built into their relationship. And so if the 2nd house is like your money, your possessions, your values, and like, you know, the work you do to get something, the 8th house is often like the opposite. It's other people's money, it's other people's esteem, it's other people's values. And it often can associate with topics, like a lot of people put like taboo topics in the 8th. I think that's possibly because of the relationship or the affinity with Scorpio. They put that sort of taboo thing. But in the ancient perspective, it kind of gets that signification of death and anxiety, and also inheritance. So it's like things that you get from your family or things you get from other people, but also its relationship to the 7th house is oh man, I have to talk about diurnal motion. Oh no, I don't know if I have enough time for that. But because of its like how do I explain this? So when planets are moving through the sky, there's the rotation of the Earth, and then there's the movement of the planets of themselves. And the movements of the planets themselves move counter to the rotation of the Earth. So like if we're thinking about the moving of the planet of this being the horizon, Saturn is about to set and end, about to go into the underworld. And so the 7th house is that ending and that connection to the other and like coming into. But the 8th house is the planet wanting to escape from the 7th and back up, but knows that ultimately its demise happens at the 7th, which is an unusual ancient like way of like understanding the house topic, but it often relates to like the anxiety around endings or the anxiety or fears that you have of something being over. whereas the seventh house is like the union or the coming together, the end of the day. And so it's kind of built into that relationship with the seventh house. But yeah, I would imagine that it could be, let me see if you also have the moon opposite, like almost directly. They're not mutually applying, which is good, or at least easier, should say. And then, okay, so I think the most prominent like thing happening in your chart is that this Saturn is like in defiance of and opposition to everything in your second house. And then you have the Venus here with the Chiron. Chiron is that wounded healer energy. I don't know if anyone here like uses Chiron. Do you want to speak on that, Kaden? I see you nodding.
Yeah, I feel like I agree with the wounded healer energy of it. I read birth charts from a like trauma healing perspective, but also from past life perspective. But past life could also be like early childhood, or it could be like a previous life just in a psychic kind of way. So Chiron, I read Chiron as like what we come into this world as. Like these are our some primary wounds that need to be addressed and will be addressed in this lifetime, and that kind of gives us the starting point of where we've come from, and this is kind of like what needs to be dealt with to move forward.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I often feel like the Chiron wounds that we need to work on will be reiterated in the usually the early life, or like whenever that karma will blossom. But like it'll show you again, like, oh, this is what you have to work on. And so, especially with the Venus in Virgo, which is considered a difficult place for Venus, I would say that there might be some topics around your own resources, your own values, and including potentially, I use the moon to be a symbol of mother. And so I wonder if there was like some restriction around the mother relationship, or some difficulty around like her esteem, or like restrictions on your mother from debts owed, or like things that you were entangled with in early life, that might be coming up for you again, or have like set the ground for like some of the fears and anxieties that you might have had growing up, or even the feeling like there may have been some restriction or like harshness around the esteem other people had of you. So I could see maybe bullying even in this, or like not having resources provided to you by other people, and having really to work yourself to like do anything, or like even the restriction of owing other people or being bound up in other people's stuff. Does any of that resonate for you?
Like maybe.
I wonder if you're actually a Cancer rising. Just because
No.
like, no, you don't think so?
I don't know. My Leo rising tends to come out if I'm under the influence of some alcohol. But other than that, it stays pretty hidden. So
Okay.
I do resonate with it a little bit, but I could definitely see the Cancer rising as well.
Yeah, so the thing with the rising sign is that like it's the thing that people notice about you first. When people meet you, it's going to be like how you appear. It's going to really like show up pretty loud. So when you say that your rising doesn't really show up unless you're drinking, it makes me feel like you might actually be Cancer rising, because usually if it's your rising sign, you're going to notice that. Now, part of that might be because this rising sign, the Leo, is being ruled by the 12th house sun, which is a place of like, hiding, lost, being hidden, invisible. And so that might be part of why. But usually people will notice about you that you have Leo-ish tendencies, but a Leo sun, a Cancer sun in the 12th will definitely modify that a lot. But can you comment maybe on like what you feel like Saturn has shown up for you, or like what you think is like an expression of that?
I haven't really delved into it too much.
Okay.
But I feel like there might be some themes of like connecting with other people.
Oh yeah.
Really like in my spirituality and kind of like stepping, how do I word this? Like kind of like how it's opposing my moon and Chiron, like kind of coming out of my own mind and the things that are holding me back to like step into my place in the world, basically. And a lot of that I think has to do with some spiritual content. I don't know if I'm making sense. I feel like
no, you're fine. I think when we talk about Pisces, there's always that little bit of loosey-goosey kind of like, how do I put this into words?
Yeah, it's come up for me, I feel like, in a very spiritual aspect so far.
Hold on. Do you mind if I try to interpret your chart with a Cancer, late degree Cancer rising?
Go for it. Yep.
Okay. I just feel like that might be the case, just to demonstrate how different the chart could look. So I'm gonna move this forward by just a few minutes. Or not, no, I have to move it back. My bad. Let's see, because this is only a 4-minute difference. Show me. Okay, the 4 minutes doesn't change it. That's encouraging. That tells me that likely this is the correct time. But let's move it back 10 and see what happens. Okay, so if you move your time back 10 minutes, and that's, that's pushing it. Like usually I don't have to move it back that far to get a correct birth chart, but that would put you at Cancer rising, and that might be, when you talk about the spiritual connection and feeling like you have to come out of your shell, that would put Saturn in your 9th house, which is all about expanding the mind, philosophy, spirituality, religion, mind, like having, so the 9th house often is related to like high spiritual experiences. So like when you like are out of body or you're connecting to the divine and they're really not common like day-to-day experiences of that, versus like the 3rd house, which is like the reflection of that 9th house ideal, is like the day-to-day rituals that put you in connection with those high spiritual experiences. And so I wonder, when you talk about like
that
being
makes
able
a lot
to
more sense. That feels like it resonates better.
Okay, so it might be that you are transposing a 2 or for a 3 for a 2, I don't know, or your mom might be, since this is still from memory. But like this would be a lot more about like communicating and learning and like putting into like day-to-day practice rituals about like this kind of like higher minded study, and like just like your I could put morals and values in this, but it's more about like morality as a topic and like how do you construct and have a responsibility to like having a sound worldview that accounts for like spiritual interconnectedness and oneness. And so that might be, if I've rectified your chart, good astrologer. If I've fucked it up, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But like yeah, I just wonder if this will be more about like what's coming up for you. It's going to be more about like you might go on a trip. If you have any trips planned, that might be related. But like maybe the solidification of just like what you believe. If that's something you struggle with, like something that you're like, I don't know what I believe, what are my beliefs? I've been like, I have all this information, I've like worked on expanding this part of me, or if you have a discipline or a diligence to like do this type of exploration. Astrology is associated with the 9th house, and so it's like a topic of study that is about that can give you a spiritual perspective. There may be like this experience of just doing the work to really solidify and codify and like give structure to like what it is you believe, and even maybe getting rid of old beliefs and things of that nature. But if that resonates, I hope it helps. once
It
you
does, actually. That
you reach
resonates
that.
so much more than what I was
Yes,
fearing.
astrologies are good. Yeah, so ninth house transits are, I have a sun moon like ninth house split, like full moon split on that axis, and for me it's really been about like, I also have the nodes there, so that colors the experience, but like a thirst for knowledge. This may also be like, I wonder if for you it's been kind of this doubting Thomas type of energy of just like, oh, is this actually real? Or like like a definitely some type of skeptical potentially like energy of just like, oh, I have to do the research and I have to prove to myself that like I'm one with the universe or something like that. I'm not sure if that resonates. But for me it's just been like lots of study and like a thirst for knowledge and constantly reading books, constantly doing information, and then like making sure I pull it back and then get back into the third house and reflect all of that study and that mind stuff and put it into practice and rituals that actually keep me grounded and connect my day-to-day action with what I'm actually like learning and expanding my mind on. But yeah, could be a religious experience for you or a experience of loss that may bring up um might bring you to like a spiritual that may require a spiritual perspective from you in order to navigate. So that's kind of like my basic delineation for that, and I hope it helps you kind of figure it out. But is that, did you want to talk anything about anything in particular that you thought might the questions, I suppose is what I'm saying?
No, actually, I don't think I have any questions. That actually makes so much more sense. And because it was overhanging everything, I feel like, because I was just like not really resonating with what I was seeing in my chart and what I've been feeling. So I feel like that puts my mind at ease and just like solidifies kind of my current experience.
Okay,
Makes it
awesome.
less doom and gloom.
Yeah, so actually I want to, before I want to see, it's probably 4 months after the ingress that you're really going to start to feel this. Oh, we're gonna, okay. So it's gonna be probably somewhere in a year after Mars, or not Mars, Saturn enters Pisces that you're actually gonna really, it's really gonna hit you. Because Saturn spends about 2 years in the sign and you're about halfway in the sign, you're Saturn. And so like I would watch for the day um, in March just to see if anything comes up in particular, especially since you have so many planets that are going to be going over your Saturn. It's going to like highlight that topic again and again for you. So you, like Spirit's going to be like, do you get it? Do you really get it? And so that will make it a lot easier. You'll notice that Saturn will be like, okay, you had all those planets to like prepare you and all that information, like this is what it is, and it's going to come in and bring it in a more solid way. All right, let's move on. Stuti, I would love your chart if you would not mind.
Sure. Should I share the details in the chat box?
Yeah, that would work. I think we might have some people in chat who have also shared. If you're in chat, oh, Kayla, I am using, sorry, I'm not been so great about the chat box. I am all over the place, but Kayla, I am using lunaastrology.com. It's a subscription-based astrology software that's through the browser. And oh yeah, Kaden. I think after Stuti, we'll look at your friends info and then like really get into it. And then anybody in here, but yeah, let's do this. Sorry, I'm like all over the place.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go for it.
I didn't want to interrupt while you were giving that interpretation, but I had an interpretation of Cheyenne's
Oh,
art as well that I was
yes.
curious to get. I can give a like short like TLDR version of
Please
it.
do. Let me bring it up again. And then I'll get the other chart going on a different window. Oh gosh.
Okay.
What was I?
I had an interpretation based on the original one, so based on like the Leo rising.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it would resonate more or less, just to see like how it feels for you.
Let's find out.
Because
This is why. Oh, go
sorry.
ahead. No, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. I was just particularly drawn to the second house and how that interacts with Saturn. But what were you gonna say?
Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm trying to put in chart information on the other window.
Oh, no
Please
worries.
go ahead.
So I'm particularly drawn to, yeah, the Venus, Chiron, and Moon opposing your Saturn. Especially in Virgo, that feels really significant to me. I feel like I see a lot of Virgo moon energy as struggling with like negative self-talk that's preventing them from getting where they want to go. And especially with it, a Chiron being in that same sign, that would make me think that that is a result of something that happened either in a past life or in an early part of your life, like as an early social conditioning in a family structure. And then with Venus there, connecting it to how you relate to people, how you show love, how you receive love. And then particularly I'm drawn to how I think this would be a trine. I'm looking at the aspects are still kind of I'm still kind of getting used to, but looking at Sun to Saturn and then North Node to Saturn, I'm thinking about the aspects of how is that a trine, Allie?
So depends on the orb you use. This is about 8 degrees away from a trine aspect with the sun.
Right.
By whole sign, they have a trine relationship, but when we talk about like the ones that are really going to show up, especially as like events that happen in the life, they're going to be closer in degree, I've found.
Okay.
Usually when I use the nodes, I don't use trines to the nodes. Not that it can't be done, but I just have found that like usually the ones that are really stick out are the when you're conjunct a node on the nodes, or if you're square to the nodes. Not that it can't be done, but also I would say that if you're going to look at a trine, the more perfect trine would be the north node. And honestly, this Pluto north node thing, like that's crazy. That's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. I
That would really tie in the sun relationship. And then the Venus and the negative self-talk type stuff I think really comes up with the Mercury being square almost by degree to the Venus in Mercury's sign, with the moon ruling the Mercury. And so like the something talking down to like your value, and then Venus in Virgo already trying to use the material of like the intellectual like perfectionist Virgo to like make harmony, like that can be just a difficult thing for Venus in general. But by whole sign they do have a trine aspect.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about how like with their relationship with the opposing relationship with Saturn in the second house, it feels like through resolving whatever's coming up or like through letting it happen, it will give you more chances to like discover how you shine in ways that aren't like readily available in your like conscious knowledge of yourself right now, which then brings you to like I read North Node as like your purpose, your destiny, whatever, like that. And so like bringing you there, but with Pluto right next to it. Like Ali said, that I feel like that's really significant in that it might feel like a painful destruction of something. Like you need to like get rid of something to get to that place. But I'll stop it there so we have time for other people because I know it's late.
Yeah, I'm like, ugh, I should have blocked this out for 3 hours. I feel like it tricked everybody. Like, oh, we're just doing this for 2 hours. No, we're here. We're here until I say we're done. Obviously, if you need to leave, if there's people with like time crunches that really want charts looked at, please let me know so that I can prioritize you. But let's look at Stuti's chart. I would love to look at your chart more, especially with the regards to the node stuff. But I gotta keep on task. My Gemini and Sagittarius. I'm gonna have to like task master them into this. Let me get this full screen. So Stuti, you also have very early degrees. um, is your chart quoted from a birth certificate?
Yes.
Okay. So I will do my best. Again, oh, this is very interesting. So this is a Cancer rising chart. You may be Gemini rising, but I think we'll look at it a little bit, and then we'll see if that changes your sign. But you have Saturn up here again in the 9th house, but then you have the Mars Sun conjunction happening here. So I believe these are separating unless Mars is going through a retrograde cycle and is slowed down or something like that. But I don't think based on this it would be. And then you got nothing going on much anyway in the squares. Let me see if there's any, and then ruling the 8th and the 7th again. Let me just look at this and kind of soak it in a little bit and see if there's anything that really sticks out to me. So one thing I'm noticing in your chart is that there aren't really, you might have, Saturn is fairly close to the MC. By degree, it's about 6 degrees separated. And so that's not a extremely tight, but it's significant enough. So I don't know what people's experience is like with the MC, but in my practice, the midheaven, or otherwise you'll see on the chart it's MC or M or something. The midheaven is the highest point in the sky, like I believe by latitude or longitude, I forget what the word is, that a planet can reach. So if the sun's arc is going through the sky, it's the highest point it'll reach, but not necessarily the midpoint of the sky. So you'll see that the MC or the midheaven will kind of shift around in the chart a little bit. Which is why a lot of the time it can show up in the 11th, 10th, or 9th. It'll kind of like wiggle around this spot depending on how your rising sign is. But what I'm noticing besides this, to get into the delineation of that, the midheaven usually juices up planets. I see it as a very potent, a potent degree. And so with some proximity to the midheaven, I would say that the Saturn has some potency and its significations are going to be a little louder in your life as well. The one thing I do like is that you're born during the day, so that makes you the day sect. That makes this Mars in Saturn or Pisces particularly difficult. But it makes Saturn as a signification a lot easier. But I also am noticing that by degree, you have very little that's aspecting the Saturn. And so in like a disharmonious way. So you don't have any squares or oppositions by a planet that's happening. Like the only thing I'm seeing, which is this Neptune sextile from Capricorn, which is the sign that Saturn rules. And the sextile is a very harmonious aspect. So I feel like because the Saturn isn't aspecting anything really negatively, that you may have this like interesting. Okay, so there may be this like what I'm getting from your placement is like something very studious and imaginative and like this like dedicated to the pursuit of spiritual knowledge is something I'm really seeing that comes up with the Saturn, and it's being aided by and aiding this Neptune and Capricorn experience. And by modern rulership, they would be in mutual reception, which means that they're kind of in each other's houses, and so they kind of have some alignment there. Or not houses, sorry, each other's signs. And so like Neptune is living in the house of Saturn, and Saturn is living in the house of Neptune. And so that way they kind of have some like interchange, and they see each other by aspect, and so they're able to give each other material and help each other out to like express themselves. So I feel like if your Saturn, if this rising sign is correct, and I want to say it probably is, just because you're almost at the 2nd degree, and usually if it's a quoted birth certificate, it usually is right, but it's very rare for babies to be born on like the hour, you know what I mean? It's generally I've seen this as pretty auspicious, if that is the correct time. And the people didn't like, whoever wrote the birth certificate didn't like, oh, thank you, Cheyenne. Thanks for coming. Bye. But yeah, would you say that like someone who puts a lot of study long-term focus on spiritual topics or philosophy and higher minded pursuits. Is that something that resonates with you?
Yes, yes, that does. There's
Okay.
almost like discipline, education perspective to these bodies of work rather than just a side thing.
Like so like because like if you studied astrology, especially this is again the ninth house goes to astrological pursuit and like spiritual technologies, like really understanding and breaking down like how these things work. Saturn is also associated with the students and the need to study and like the practice of being devoted and disciplined in their study, because it takes a long time to sit there for hours on end looking over the same subject to really get a thorough understanding. For you, it feels, let me put the transit on top. I just feel like because of how well dignified your Saturn is, I mean, the only way it could be more dignified really would be if it was not sharing the sign with Mars. So there's some challenge here with Mars and Pisces. I might want, and then the sun might be a little bit harshed. The mellow of the sun is a little harshed by what Mars is doing. The only way that your Saturn could really be in a better spot is if it was in its own sign of Aquarius or Capricorn. So it had its own rulership. It's kind of like the difference of being between in your friend's house or at your own house, right? When you're at your own house, you can do whatever the hell you want for the most part. You can like, and you have everything you need at your disposal, as opposed to when you're at your friend's house, your friend is amicable to you and wants to help you out. But they might not have everything you're used to, and so you're working with and you have to defer to them when you want to do something. Let me look at the transit very quickly. I should have saved a chart for Saturn moving into Pisces. I think the thing you're going to notice really immediately is that Saturn is going to start talking to your Sun and your Mars. And so because of the difficult Mars placement that you have going on, there might be something that like some restriction or like sudden, like maybe not super sudden, but something that comes up in the outer world that's going to like really something you might want to buck against. I'm seeing like, or maybe even like a teacher or ways of thinking, or like because it's in the ninth house, it could be like, or even a religious figure potentially, or like religious dogma that comes up that you're just like absolutely not, and there's gonna be a lot of like like they're gonna be fighting each other. Mars will definitely I feel like be agitated early in the transit, and your Saturn and Pisces is fairly far back, so there'll be some space away from that experience once Saturn moves over and actually hits your natal Saturn by degree. And so I feel like it will probably be some sort of like solidification again. Like I think a lot of the similar themes I talked to with Cheyenne about like the solidification of beliefs, or like letting go of things, or maybe there's a lot of you're studying something and then you like narrow your topic down, and things of that nature. Does that resonate for you, or does that make sense?
I'm actually quite curious about the Mars placement.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure. Like you mentioned that Saturn is a little bit farther away from it. So how do they talk to each other then?
I'm sorry, what?
How do they talk to each other then?
They're farther. When I say they're far away, I mean that they're not touching by degree. So the way I can visualize this for you is that let's think of the signs as like a house. Like they're thought of as the temple of the gods, and so this is like where they reside, it's where they rule. And whenever two planets are in the same sign, it's like being in the same house. Now, how close you are in the house is different. So like let's say Saturn is upstairs, but Mars is like, in the living room downstairs. They're still occupying the same space, but they're not interacting directly. And so when you get to them closer by degree, what you're going to notice is that there may be more interaction or an event that happens between the two of them. So that's kind of the best way I can describe it. It's kind of like, you're at home. It's the difference of feeling home by yourself. So you're just, chilling at your house and no one's there to like take care of. But if you have a guest in the house, they might be, in the bathroom doing something, but you still have to put some energy and thought and consideration to the fact that someone else is in your house. So it's kind of like that. It's this is more of a tonal energy thing that I think when they're not like touching in the chart, I would say. But to have both malefics in the ninth, I wonder if religious dogma was like something that you grew up with and like having to buck against a restriction of like around like, I don't know, difficulties. It could be even difficulties in college, not of like your own like you not having trouble learning, but like potentially relationships with teachers or like different learning structures or things of that nature. But that's kind of a looser interpretation. The ninth house also deals with long trips and foreign places. So if you've ever immigrated or if you ever found yourself to feel like you were the foreign person in a place, something of that nature. Though I think that's less true with you because your moon is in the 11th and that's ruling your ascendant. So, but I don't know if any of that resonates. That's just kind of what I'm like reading into. If there are any other interpretations, I'd love to hear.
I had, oh, sorry, this one's saying something.
Yeah, please go on. Yeah.
I was gonna say I'd stepped away for a second, so I missed the last part of what you said, Ali. But what most stuck out to me, in terms of your Saturn, and I think Ali did talk about this a little, but definitely the relationship to your Saturn being so close to your MC. To me, that feels like similar to what Ali was saying, but maybe to expand on it. I think it could show up in other sorts of institutions that your Saturn return might maybe bring you new positions of recognition in those institutions. So
Yeah.
like I see the MC as like that's where you're being seen publicly. Like that's your outside world. That's the external. And ninth house could be so many things, I think, but definitely like what Ali was saying, the spiritual kind of like dedication to things. This, when I saw that, it made me think like maybe you're a well-recognized like doctor or lawyer or professor or like academic in some sort of like learning institution, or it could be on the spiritual side of like maybe it just feels like you're getting more recognition for something you've been working hard towards in a sort of like structured academic sense. Yeah, that's what stuck out to me most, so I wanted to share.
Something that's I want to make sure it's Duty because I know you wanted to say something. So
Oh, actually, I just had questions around MC. I've actually not read and studied a lot about midheaven, and they're placing now next to Saturn. So I actually had questions around that, but I think we can come to it in some time.
Oh, well, the midheaven, I mean, I think Caden kind of summarized it really well. Because it's the highest point in the sky that the planet can reach by the elliptical. By latitude, I forget the word again. It tends to be again like where you're seen very visibly. It can be, and it tends to bring like it puts that planet like in the like highest point in the sky. It just tends to be this like kind of I because it's in the ninth house. I think it still can definitely relate to like being seen or being visible. But also I wonder if there's like a being seen and being visible in or because of like being removed or feeling separate. I don't, which is an interesting way to put that because of the Saturn having rulership or having significations of being like alone or isolated, and so being more visible because there's something there's some difference about you that might separate you from other people or feeling different from other people in general. But yeah, we can talk more about the MC if you'd like, though there's not too much more to talk about. The other part of the chart that goes to kind of like being visible and seen is the 10th house, since it's the culminating point in the sky. But yeah, the MC will do that. I could see it could also be the one thing I wrote down is like one of the archetypal type of figures you might see in a position like that is like a monk, a priest, or a disciple with like this like austerity and discipline towards spiritual connection. Oh, bye, Christy. Bye, babies. Like discipline towards spirituality and connection to the universe, and it can also manifest as extreme religious or spiritual rigidity and disciplined in ritual action, but not devoted in feeling. And like go back to cult leaders again. Those are kind of just like energies to consider when thinking about your Saturn and Pisces and see how maybe you inhabit that. I also wonder if this was like a religious structure that you may have inhabited growing up that you struggled with to some degree. I don't know if that resonates, but
Not struggled with, but definitely grew up in a very my mom was quite religious, so there was a lot of importance on learn about it, study about it, figure it out, you belong here, all of that. I'm curious about it, but I've not jumped into it. There is also some but I'm curious about it, history wise, values wise.
I think that might be part of your Saturn return story. Because the 9th house is often related to religious structures and churches, priests, religious leaders, and things of that nature. I think there was one more person that I have to look at. I think Kayla. Hi. Well, thank you.
Hi.
I would just want to say thank you, Stuti, for letting us look at your chart. If we have, I think if we have more time later, if you want, we can talk more, but we're about to go in 3 hours. So I want to make sure we have time to look at least one more chart. But hey, Kayla, do you have a Saturn in Pisces? I think you might be I think you're right at the end of the Saturn in Pisces range.
I have a Saturn in Aries.
Okay.
But I have a Pisces North node and I've definitely been feeling it. Or sorry,
Okay.
South node. But if you are just looking at the Pisces in Saturn, that's totally okay.
I don't think we have any other charts. I don't know if there's anyone else who had a Saturn and Pisces chart they wanted to bring up.
I have a Saturn in Pisces. It's a later degree in 19 degrees.
Okay. Kayla, how about I don't know if I'll have time to look at your chart today, unfortunately, but I would like to help you out if that's something that you want to look at, but I think we might not have time for that. But let me just, if you could give me your birth data, that would be great.
Yeah. January 1st.
Oh, could you put it in the chat because I copy and paste this? But I think there'll probably be I should just do an Astro talk where people talk about the charts and we just like dissect everybody's stuff. Oh, Kaden, we also have so many.
I mean, you and I are gonna talk next week, so we can talk about it then.
Okay, that's
like
perfect.
Some other time.
That'd be awesome.
I was thinking though, I was like, I love this stuff. It would be so cool to do a recurring just like Astro talk like once a month.
Yeah. I was thinking about like doing like a regular thing where I just like compile all of the transits that are happening and I say, everyone, bring your charts. Let's look. But Jess, yes, thank you.
Is the best way to get in contact with you is through this app, Allie?
Yeah, that works perfect. I'm all over Mystery School. Oh, it used to be Mystery School, Conscious Community, sorry. But yeah, I do full and new moon interpretations for people using their rising sign. I usually ask for charts because I like to look. And like if there's any prominent planets, let them know like, hey, it's gonna be touching this in your chart, and so you should look out for this specifically. But yeah, so I may not be able to help you today, but if you ever see me posting about the full and new moons, I can definitely help you see some transits in your chart.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, Jess. I think you're born like at the tail end of the Saturn and Pisces. No, you're in middle. I'm sorry. That was closer to 1997. I'm pretty sure.
I remember that because I'm right at the start of Saturn and Aries. It left Saturn and Pisces. I think it was like April 7th, 1996 or something like that.
1996. Okay. I think it may have dipped out. I'm interested. I'm gonna have to look. I have it written down.
One of my friends, their birthday is April 5th, 1996. So I know they're in the last like, day of it. So they're like right at the last degree.
Oh, this is interesting. So we have the April. Okay, it's moving pretty fast by then if it moves out in 2 months after being at the 19th degree. Let's look. And are we quoting a birth certificate?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Usually when people have like odd numbers like in the birth time, they're usually quoting a birth certificate. Ooh, okay, we have a Libra rising. Okay, so this is kind of the polar opposite of what's going on for me. Oh, and you have the lot of spirit right on top. Interesting. Okay. Wow, you have so much stuff going on. Oh my God. Wow, wow, wow. Okay, so you're born like right in the middle of the Neptune-Uranus conjunction in Capricorn with Mars going like, hey. So that's gonna have some things to say about what's going on with your Saturn return. But by degree, wow, like by degree, like there's really nothing harshing your your what I should say is that Saturn isn't harshing anything else in your chart, which is nice to see. It is you are born during the night, so that will make Saturn significations a little more difficult. I
have a question.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Please interrupt me. I talk too much entirely.
No, you're good. I'm curious, what's that symbol above Saturn? The like circle with a line through it?
Oh, it's called the Lot of Spirit. It
Oh.
is a the lots, are they Arabic? I forget. Basically lots are points that are calculated by the relationship mathematically between two planets. I forget how the lot of spirit is calculated, but it's not like a point. It's not like a planet. It says something else. I don't know enough about the lots to really talk about them with any authority. I barely know enough about astrology to talk about this with any authority. But I would say that having Saturn in the 6th with a lot of spirit in the 6th house, like conjunct that closely, is fairly auspicious. And I'm sure that there will be things that what's the word? I'm sure that because I have less knowledge about the lot of spirit, that there's going to be some delineation stuff that I might not be able to touch upon in their fullness. Like all I can say is that because it's like happening right on top of the lot of spirit, that there's like this feeling of like there's a certain like importance to that placement that I can't really describe fully because I don't know enough about the lot of spirit to give you. I just want to let you know that that is a factor at least. But looking at your Saturn, I wonder, just right off the bat, we have the Venus in Aquarius. Okay, I wonder if you've had issues with water in the body, or if like there has been injuries around water, or like too much water, like congestions, or like the like phlegm and things like that, or like illnesses around that. Is that anything at all?
No,
Okay.
but I've I think I can relate to the like being really emotional. Like
Yes.
really
Okay.
sensitive to
So emotional
everything.
waters. I think part of the fact that it's not I was wondering that because a lot of the time with the 6th house, The sixth house is related to injury, illness, labor. In ancient times, it was associated with slaves or work, it could make slaves of people, or it was talking about slaves you owned, which is a very ancient delineation. Um, but like it talks about often about routines and labor and the work we do just to maintain life. Like all of the shit you got to do just to like keep things like level, you know what I mean? Um, and so I asked about injury because sometimes when I see Saturn um in the sixth house, I wonder about like issues. There could be issues also with the bones, the teeth. With Saturn and Pisces, it could be the feet and the skin.
Yeah, when I was younger, I had some like bones fusing.
Okay.
Really.
Okay. Yeah, so the thing about so like to understand, one of the ways I understand the sixth house, or at least the way I can help me understand the 12th, because the 12th feels very nebulous, as I use the sixth house, because the sixth house is like those things, those injuries and illnesses that happen that are very direct, and they have a straightforward treatment plan. So like you were having this like solidification of Saturn solidifying your bones in the sixth, like working like an illness in the body, but it seemed like it was a pretty direct, like, oh, okay, we can directly diagnose this and then we can directly deal with it, even though like I felt like it would probably be like a long, kind of a difficult treatment plan, but like something you had to work over time to help unfuse bones,
I
or
didn't
did you have
really
to go
get
for surgery?
onto a treatment plan. It was just kind of like, this is what's happening, and this you're just gonna have to live with it.
Oh, damn, it's just I can't even treat it. Okay.
Yeah, it was just you're just gonna be short for the rest of your life. You can't grow
Same.
anymore. That kind of stuff.
Got it. Okay, so there's a stiffness related to that. Okay. Yeah, so when I see Saturn in the sixth, I like that he's not really aspecting anything super directly. There's a sextile aspect to the sun, which is all, or actually it's technically to the IC, but I'll include the sun in that. Um, and he has rulership of everything happening in the fourth and the fifth. So let me think. I wonder if, let me bring up the transit really quickly. I wonder if there will be some potential for development around that bone fusing, or like it also could just be a period of a lot of work. Like just, oh, I have to go like I have to get the car fixed. I have like all these like new responsibilities just to keep the maintenance of the home, or like your life, or your, in particular, your body. Um and so there may be some potential complications or difficulties around the bone fusing. Is there also like uh I feel like this is more because of, I might be misinterpreting this because I haven't experienced with Saturn this way, but like is there also a dryness of the skin?
No.
Okay, awesome for you. Very glad. Saturn is like very dry and drying, and so sometimes can bring up that. But it could also be because of I think that's more because I have a lot of fire and air in my chart, and so it heats me up, it dries me out, and so like I have a hard time with like staying moisturized. Um, Speaking of which, I should hydrate. But I would watch out for potential health issues showing up. Let me see. Yours is not going to happen for a while, like directly. But there may end up being, let me see. It's probably going to be within a year or so. Okay, yeah. In 2024, in June, is when you're going to have your direct Saturn return. Like by the degree. Whereas like right now, I would try to maintain like limberness and like do the bones, is there anything you can do to slow down the bones fusing?
No.
Okay.
That when they told me that, that was like around like 8 or so. And
Okay.
then
The opening
yeah,
square.
they had told me that by the time I was like 16, like that would be as much as I would grow. And then probably like about 6 months ago, I started working for a chiropractor, and we did some x-rays, and he actually told me that my last two bones, like right by the tailbone or the sacrum, they were fusing together as well.
Okay.
So that's like another piece of information that I like later on found out like recently.
Okay.
I can't really do anything besides just adjustments and like taking care of myself.
Yeah, I would really focus on that, especially as Saturn comes to the natal placement. I'm because it's not harshing so much in the chart, but it is ruling your the chart ruler, because you're a Libra rising, which makes Venus your chart ruler, and it's 1 o'clock. I think this will be the last one I do, or that we do together. That would make that Saturn the dispositor of your Venus. So like what Saturn is doing has a lot of effect on your Venus, and then your Venus is representative of you in the chart because it's ruling your first house, which is the you house. And so there's some, I feel like there's this like playful and explorative and like communicative thing that you have going on in the 5th in Aquarius, because you got that beautiful Venus and Mercury conjunction in Aquarius. It's just like really imaginative, like not imaginative, what's the word? Forward thinking, progressive, like mind, and like type of pleasure seeking, very mentally stimulating is something I would see. Like you really appreciate that. It's very pleasurable for you, at least based on what I'm seeing in your chart.
Yeah,
but there's
definitely.
something that's really restricting that here from this. There's a little bit of a restriction because of its rulership with Saturn here in the 6th. So I wonder if those health issues, or like even the ability, like the control and the rigidity around expressing emotion and like being connected, is making it more difficult for you to enjoy those things with other people, because those two planets like really want to reach out and like talk and like get that feedback back and have really like like there's something very communicative and like playful about that Venus Mercury conjunction you got going on. But yeah, I would definitely keep an eye on your health first and foremost. There may be more complications that arise from your Saturn return, is what I would say. So as long as you, and there may not be anything you can do to avoid that, but I think Saturn rewards diligence and discipline often. But there also may be like a spiritual like perspective that comes up as well from that Piscean imaginal waters that gives you a perspective on what's happening in your body, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything anyone wanted to throw at this? I'm just looking a little harder about, hold on. I'm gonna throw this like to your actual Saturn return and see what's going on in the chart. And then also like, yeah, there it is. All that stuff will be moved out by the time that happens. It's gonna, oh, and then you have a natal moon square. Wait, you have a natal moon square? I didn't even notice that. Astrologer bad. Okay, yeah. Okay, so then that's coming into play. Yeah, with the natal moon square, that'll definitely affect the body. And then potentially difficulty around mom stuff or restriction around a relationship with mother. If that doesn't resonate, please don't take it. But that's just something I often see with Saturn moon contact, is that there's some sort of like coldness or like restriction around what's happening with mom. Does that resonate or no?
No.
Okay. I'm glad to see that. Let me see where this is ruling. So not a coldness or is there potentially I wonder if there was just a difficulty and a lot of labor that mom had to do. I don't know if that resonates either. I'm like reaching.
I feel like it resonates more like when I was younger, when I was like around like 14 through 16, like we were very like polar opposites, and I was going
Okay.
through a lot of like depression, and she wouldn't really like reciprocate.
Got it. Okay, so that was your Saturn opposition.
Yeah.
And that would have been squaring your moon, which is related to the mother. And so the fact that you've like, I'm glad that you've moved through that, because I'm like, okay, so there must have, I felt like there might be some restriction here. I wonder if like health issues were difficult for your mom to handle, or like there was a lot of like tension around um like maintaining some type of laborious nature, but I could be wrong about that as well. Ah, why did the chart change? Ah. Anyway, how did I miss that Saturn moon square? It's like almost perfect. I'm like, it looks fine. Oh my goodness. Sorry. I think it means I've been doing it for too long. But oh yeah, what's up?
What is the significance between the aspect of Saturn and my MC? Because they're
Oh,
both.
the line here?
Yeah.
So the way that I use the midheaven is usually if the midheaven is conjunct a planet, which means the planet is directly on top of the midheaven. I don't usually look at relationships between um like a trine to the midheaven or even a square to the midheaven. Usually because, well, technically the square to the midheaven will be your ascendant and descendant anyway, so like you'll have a different interpretation of like Saturn on the descendant. So this is just telling me that this point is in a trine relationship to where Saturn is, but because in my practice I don't use the midheaven aspects to the midheaven except for conjunctions, I don't really count this aspect here.
Okay.
There are different ways of approaching this. I have not heard of a practice that uses aspects to the midheaven, but I don't know everything about astrology, and everyone has their own practice and ways of using the symbolism in the chart. So
Okay,
but
thank you.
is there anything that anyone wanted to talk about related to this chart? I wish I had looked at this moon sooner, because now this is the one thing in the chart that's like, oh, okay, this is like kind of overbearing on this moon.
Yeah, I feel like I would also just emphasize the moon Saturn. I
Yeah.
don't know if I have an immediate interpretation of it. I feel like I need to like reflect on that.
Yeah, me too.
Or maybe the relationship. I I haven't read this way, but I'm thinking about what you said about like the houses that are right next to each other and how they're moving into each other. Um, that was really interesting to me, and I'm noticing how the south node is right above in the seventh house. There might be some significance there of like maybe some shedding of, and it's seventh house of relationships, so maybe restriction around, I don't know, some type of like shedding with restriction and like committed relationships or something like that. I don't know. I'm also like
Free balling.
Yeah.
So what I think that the relationship stuff is really gonna come up because we have this Chiron right here on the ascendant. And like that's gonna deal with like in the sign of Libra, which is all about like relational things. And so like some wounding around identity and like who am I in relation to other people? How can I like I could see sometimes with Chiron Libra there being like a sense of people pleasing. And like a wounded sense of identity of like who am I if I'm not liked by people? Who am I if I can't be what people want me to be? And so yeah, and then I think that gets tied in because we have the Saturn here ruling the Venus, which is again talking about all this first house stuff. And so like yeah, I think this also might be like how can I express my playful fun self when I got all this wounding here that I'm carrying.
I didn't realize I didn't realize you were a Libra rising. I didn't see that either. So that's North Node and Chiron in the first house. That
yeah,
I agree
juicy.
that yeah, big like wounded healer energy of like especially with the sun in the fourth house with Uranus there. I feel like that's maybe around family things that impacted that, like family.
Oh yeah, we got family stuff all over this chart too.
Yeah, fourth house sun is big, like family trauma in some way. We all have family trauma, but
I think the Mars is really bringing up that like family trauma stuff because Mars tends to bring, and at least, I mean, it's nice to see a dignified Mars, but like in general, Mars tends to bring lots of work, lots of like, he's the god of war and blood and conflict. And so when I see the him here talking in the fourth house, I'm like, oh, okay. And then that's going to bring up the relationship stuff again because it's ruling the seventh house and potentially even about money or like self-value because we're bringing in the second house rulership as well. But
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I also have Libra, North Node, and Chiron. Mine is in my 12th house, so like one off, and so I yeah.
I think I told you that already, like big oof.
Yeah, big oof. But I feel like I've been like sitting with that energy for a while and reflecting on what it means. Especially to have North Node and Chiron together. It feels like to get to where you're going, you need to address this big wound, and that's maybe like a prevention of where you're coming from. I get, because I'm also 1996. I think me and my friends who are born in that time, we all have the Chiron and North Node conjunct, and that feels very, very significant. I feel like people with it in your first house, like that's so prominent to who you are as a person. Like it probably is a prominent wound of like maybe your Saturn return will be you addressing that, maybe cutting off relationships that require you to keep people pleasing, and like it's that pattern that happens when you start setting boundaries in relationships where they've been used to you doing everything for them. Once you say like, oh no, I actually can't do that anymore, I need to focus on myself, those people will start to leave your life. And I feel like that can be painful, but it's like a necessary part of it to bring in the next kind of cycle of whatever Saturn's bringing for you.
Yeah, I think it's gonna also like because it's ruling the fourth house and the fifth, but more so the fourth house, like it's gonna bring in that family karma as well. So like I wonder if like there may be, I don't know if there's, I don't know how much you've worked through with mom because again, the most prominent aspect we got going on here is that it also might relate to father because we have the sun as well, and I use the sun and moon as mother and father, usually biological. And so there may be some rehashing of conflicts or difficulty around familial things. And if there is any like, it just brings up like the sixth house is just like is it's also known as the house in which we are unlucky. And so ways in which we can find ourselves being unlucky and what planet rules that house can kind of like or the planets that are in that house can kind of like speak to that. And so yeah, I just wonder how that will how you might have some loss and some like difficulty. And then when you had your Saturn opposition, I just wanted to say this before we close up for today, is that when you're going through your Saturn opposition with Saturn in the 12th, like the 12th house for me is very mental illness related because it's the illnesses that we can't see. And so sometimes it could show up as chronic illness that is really hard to diagnose. Um, like that malaise we feel that like doesn't seem to have an origin or like is very slippery and hard to like define. And so mental illness really fits into that category because by virtue of just being like an illness that can't be seen and is often hard to treat, especially from the perspective of like from the self agency. Like when you're depressed, like okay, cool, like you know you're supposed to go get a therapist and like you know you're supposed to do all these things, but like if you don't have the agency, you don't feel like you have the agency or the energy to do that, like treating it is going to be a lot harder. And they tend to be things that last for a while. So like I felt like there's probably a 2-year period where you were having a lot of difficulty with mom. And you were feeling this depression, which like a Gemini moon is not going to understand. Like depression who? Um, um like that would just like I imagine that 2-year period it must have been really difficult to have Saturn moving through the 12th house that way. So I'm ready for my 12th house return and hopefully trying to move through that malaise myself. But yeah, I hope that whatever the difficulty is, that it is not something that is too harsh for you to handle Usually night charts tend to have the harder version of the Saturn return because at night Saturn is considered more difficult to handle.
I want to add on what you just said about the 12th house being like the hidden illnesses and mental illness and things. I feel like that relates very strongly to what we talked about with the everything happening in the first house with like people pleasing is an unconscious thing that we do for so long, and it when we people please, we're hiding whatever's happening with us even to ourselves a lot of the times. I've been on this journey myself in the last few years of just realizing like, oh, I'm masking these things, not just from other people, but from myself included. And so I feel like the journey of the 12th house is being like, maybe the things are kind of bubbling to the surface, but you're like, I don't know what the fuck this is. Like, I need to like sit with it to figure
Or
it
like,
out.
or its
Yeah.
source, like where is it coming from?
Yeah.
Like, because in
Exactly.
order to like really, you could deal with the symptoms of a problem, but if you don't know the source, then you're never going to be able to like address it. And that's often with the difficulty of the 12th house. It's like, where the fuck is it? The problem is it's between your shoulder blades and you can't fucking see it.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, okay. I gotta cut this off because it's been 3 hours and change. And I meant to only do this for 2 hours, but here we are. Thank you guys for sticking it out with me and going through this transit and this energy. And I definitely want to be hosting regular, like I'm probably do a monthly one, just to go over transits and stuff. Might be in sync with the moon cycles. I haven't thought about that yet, but yeah. Thanks so much, and I hope you guys. If there's, I will be posting this on the event, the PDF or doc that I make, so that way you can access these notes. I have recorded this, which I'm going to stop the recording now. So I'm going to say bye to all the recording people. Goodbye. Thank you for watching. I can't believe you watched 3 hours of this. Good for you. Toodles.